Hide in the fitting room. That is what my tailor whispered to me 10 minutes before my life changed forever. I stood in the dark, holding my breath while my future son-in-law and his mother walked in. They did not know I was there. They thought I was just a senile old man ripe for the picking. But what I heard through that thin velvet curtain didn't just break my heart, it sharpened my mind. Before I tell you how I stopped a wedding and saved my own life, please tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not given. I am Desmond King, 72 years old. For 40 years I worked as a civil engineer building bridges that connect cities, but I never realized the bridge to my own daughter was being burned down by the very man she intended to marry. It was a Friday afternoon, the day before my daughter Maya's wedding. I had gone to Russo's Custom Tailors in downtown Brooklyn to pick up my tuxedo. Russo has been my friend since the 80s. He is a loud, joyful Italian man who usually greets me with a bear hug and a glass of scotch. But that day, the shop was as silent as a grave. When I walked in, Russo didn't smile. His face was pale, his eyes darting toward the front window. I opened my mouth to ask about the tuxedo, but he rushed out from behind the counter. He didn't say hello. He grabbed my arm with a grip surprisingly strong for a man of his age and shoved me toward the back of the shop. "Get in the fitting room," he hissed. His voice was trembling. I tried to protest, asking him what on earth was wrong, but he cut me off. "Just listen to me, Desmond. They are parking the car right now. You need to hear this. If you say a word, they will know. Trust me." He pushed me into the corner stall and drew the heavy velvet curtain shut. I was left standing in the dark, surrounded by the smell of wool and cedar, completely confused. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I am a man of logic, a man of blueprints and concrete. I do not do well with surprises. I was about to step out and demand an explanation when the bell above the front door jingled. The sound of high heels clicking against the hardwood floor echoed through the shop. It was a sharp, aggressive rhythm I recognized instantly. It was Constance Whitaker, the mother of my future son-in-law, and following her with that heavy, confident stride was Gavin. Russo's voice changed instantly. He put on his customer service mask. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitaker. Mr. Gavin," he said, though I could hear the strain in his throat. "You are early. We don't have time for pleasantries, Russo." Constance's voice was shrill, cutting through the air like a knife. "Is the old man's suit ready? We need to make sure he looks presentable for the circus tomorrow." I stiffened. The circus. That is what she called my daughter's wedding. I clenched my fists at my sides, my fingernails digging into my palms. "It is ready," Russo replied, "but Mr. King usually comes in to try it on himself. He won't be coming." Gavin interrupted. His voice was smooth, arrogant, the voice of a man who has never been told no in his life. "Desmond is not feeling well. He is getting confused again. We will take the suit. Put it on my tab." I frowned in the darkness. Confused, I had just finished the Sunday crossword puzzle in pen that morning. I managed 3 rental properties and handled my own taxes. I was not confused. But what Gavin said next made my blood run cold. "Are you sure he signed the power of attorney?" Gavin Constance asked. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, but in the quiet shop I heard every syllable. "I do not want to wait until he kicks the bucket to get that money. That brownstone in Brooklyn is the only thing standing between us and bankruptcy." I stopped breathing. My house. The 4-story brownstone I had bought in 1982, back when nobody wanted to live in this neighborhood. I had raised Maya there. I had nursed my late wife there. It was worth over $8 million now. And they wanted to sell it. "Don't worry," Mother Gavin laughed. It was a cruel, dry sound. "The paperwork is ready. We just need to prove he is mentally incompetent. Once the court grants us the conservatorship over him, Maya gets control. And since Maya does whatever I tell her to do, we get the house. We sell it next week, pay off my investors, and nobody is the wiser. But the judge will need proof." Gavin Constance pressed. She sounded anxious. "Judges don't just hand over a person's life because you ask nicely." "That is why tomorrow is so important," Gavin replied. I could hear the smile in his voice. "I switched his blood pressure medication this morning." My hand flew to my chest. I had taken my pill just hours ago. A small yellow pill, just like always. "You did what Constance asked. I replaced them with high-dose sedatives," Gavin explained, sounding proud of himself. "By the time the ceremony starts, he won't just be tired. He will be slurring his words. He will be stumbling. He might even wet himself on stage. Everyone will see it. The guests, the videographer, the judge's wife who is on the guest list. It will be undeniable proof that poor Desmond King has lost his mind and needs to be put in a home for his own safety. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The walls of the fitting room seemed to close in on me. This wasn't just greed. This was evil. They weren't just trying to steal my home. They were trying to steal my dignity. They wanted to humiliate me in front of 200 people in front of my daughter just to get their hands on my assets. Constance chuckled. You are a genius, Gavin. A real genius. That old man has been looking down his nose at us for too long, acting like he is better than us just because he got lucky with real estate. It is time he learns his place. He is just a resource, Mother Gavin said dismissively, like a battery. You use it up and then you throw it away. Now grab the suit. We have a rehearsal dinner to attend. I need to go play the loving son-in-law. I heard the rustle of fabric as Russo handed them the suit. I prayed Russo would not look at the curtain. I prayed my heavy breathing would not give me away. Make sure you bill us for the rush order, Gavin said. Or actually, bill Desmond. He won't notice the difference anyway. The door chime jingled again. Their footsteps faded onto the busy street. Silence returned to the shop, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence. Russo pulled back the curtain. His face was gray. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I am sorry, Desmond, he whispered. I didn't know how to tell you. I heard Gavin on the phone yesterday arranging the pill swap. I had to let you hear it for yourself. I stepped out of the fitting room. My legs felt heavy, but my back was straight. I looked at myself in the three-way mirror. I saw an old man, yes. I saw the gray hair and the wrinkles. But I also saw the man who had survived poverty, discrimination, and the loss of his wife. I saw a man who had built skyscrapers from nothing. Desmond Russo asked, his voice shaking. What are you going to do? Are you going to call the police? The wedding is tomorrow. You have to cancel it. I looked at Russo. A cold, hard calm settled over me. It was the same calm I used to feel before walking onto a dangerous construction site. No, I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, strong. I am not going to cancel anything. Russo looked confused. But they are going to drug you. They are going to humiliate you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the handkerchief I had used to wipe my mouth earlier. I unfolded it. Inside lay the yellow pill I had pretended to swallow that morning. I had felt a strange, chalky texture on my tongue and had spit it out when Gavin wasn't looking simply because it tasted off. Now I knew why. They think I am a battery, Russo, I said carefully, wrapping the pill back up. They think I am a resource to be used and discarded. They think I am a foolish old man who will stumble and fall so they can walk over my body to the bank. I turned to my friend and placed a hand on his shoulder. I am not canceling the wedding, I told him. I am going to attend. I am going to walk my daughter down the aisle. And when the moment is right, I am going to give a speech that Gavin and Constance will never forget. Russo managed a small, nervous smile. You have a plan, I have better than a plan, I said, walking toward the door. I have the truth. And tomorrow everyone is going to hear it. But first I need you to make a few adjustments to my tuxedo. What kind of adjustments? Russo asked. I need a hidden pocket, I said. Right here on the lapel. Big enough for a microphone. I walked out of the shop and into the cooling afternoon air of Brooklyn. The city sounded different to me now. It wasn't just noise. It was a battlefield. And I was ready for war. Russo handed me a glass of lukewarm tap water. His hand trembling so hard a few drops spilled onto the counter. I drank it in one gulp, trying to wash away the bitter taste of betrayal that had coated my throat. Russo looked at me with eyes full of guilt. I should have told you sooner, Desmond, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Yesterday when Gavin came in for a fitting, he was on the phone. He thought I was in the back steaming shirts, but I was right there behind the rack. I heard him say the word sedative, and then he laughed. It was a cold laugh, Desmond. The kind of laugh that makes your skin crawl. I nodded slowly, placing the glass down. You did the right thing, Russo, I said. You gave me the weapon of silence. Now I know the war has started. I left the shop and walked out into the Brooklyn twilight. The streets were busy with people rushing home from work, young couples laughing, parents chasing children. They all looked so normal, so safe. They had no idea that a few blocks away a man was walking home to a house that was no longer a sanctuary, but a trap. When I arrived at my brownstone, the house I had bought 40 years ago with the sweat of my brow and the savings from double shifts at the engineering firm, it looked the same as always. The heavy oak door, the wrought iron railings, the flower boxes my late wife Sarah had planted. But as I turned the key in the lock, The click sounded like the cocking of a gun. I went straight upstairs to the bathroom. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs that felt dangerous, but I forced myself to breathe. I am an engineer. I solve problems. I do not panic. I opened the medicine cabinet. There it was. The orange prescription bottle with my name on it. Desmond King, high blood pressure, take one daily. It looked innocent enough. It looked exactly like the bottle I had been opening every morning for 10 years. But when I popped the cap open and poured a few pills into my palm, I saw the truth. My usual pills were small, round, and white. These were slightly oval and a pale shade of yellow. To the untrained eye, they might look the same. But I spent my life looking at blueprints where a millimeter of difference could mean a bridge collapse. I knew instantly. I poured one of the old pills I had saved in a travel container onto the counter next to the new ones. The difference was subtle, but undeniable. Gavin had not just swapped the pills, he had found a generic sedative that looked almost identical to my medication. It was calculated. It was precise. It was the work of a man who had thought this through down to the last detail. I felt a surge of rage, so hot it almost blinded me. I wanted to sweep the bottles off the counter and shatter the mirror. I wanted to drive over to Gavin's luxury apartment and drag him out by his expensive silk tie. But then I remembered the conversation in the fitting room. They want to prove I am incompetent. They want to prove I am aggressive, unstable, and dangerous. If I confront him now with rage, I am just giving him the performance he needs for the judge. See, Your Honor, he is violent, he is confused, he is attacking his family. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, counting to 10, just like Sarah used to tell me when I came home frustrated from a site inspection. I put the yellow pills back in the bottle and placed it exactly where it had been. I put the real pill in my pocket. 2 hours later, the front door opened. It was Maya. Her voice floated up the stairs, sweet and familiar. Dad, we are here. I bought Chinese takeout. I checked my reflection in the mirror. I smoothed out the wrinkles in my shirt and put on a mask of weary calmness. I walked down the stairs, gripping the banister a little tighter than usual. Maya was in the kitchen setting plates on the table. She looked beautiful, her hair pulled back, stressing over the last-minute wedding details. But my eyes went straight to Gavin. He was standing by the refrigerator pouring wine. He wore a crisp blue suit that probably cost more than my first car. When he saw me, his face lit up with that practiced, charming smile that had fooled my daughter, and until today had fooled me too. Hey, Dad, Gavin said, walking over to clap me on the shoulder. You look a little rough around the edges. Tough day at the crossword puzzle. The condescension dripped from his voice like syrup. I forced the corners of my mouth up. Just tired, Gavin. I said, my voice intentionally a little slower than usual. The weather changes really get into my joints these days. Maya looked up from the plates, worry instantly clouding her eyes. You should sit down, Dad. Have you been drinking enough water? Gavin told me you seemed a little confused when he called earlier. I looked at my daughter, my smart, capable daughter who was a pharmacist yet couldn't see the poison right in front of her. Gavin had already started planting the seeds of doubt in her mind. He was gaslighting her about her own father. I am fine, sweetheart, I said, sitting down at the head of the table. Just pre-wedding jitters. I want everything to be perfect for you. We sat down to eat. The smell of the sesame chicken, usually my favorite, made my stomach turn. I watched Gavin eat. He ate with gusto, confident and relaxed. He was sitting in my house, eating my food at my table, planning to steal it all from under my feet. Suddenly, Gavin stopped chewing. He wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked at me with mock concern. Oh, wait. Dad, did you take your evening dose yet? The blood pressure meds. You know, Dr. Stevens said it is crucial you don't miss a dose, especially with the stress of the wedding. I froze. My fork hovered halfway to my mouth. This was the test. He wanted to watch me take the poison. I think I took it this morning, I mumbled, playing the part of the forgetful old man. No, Dad, Maya said, jumping up. The evening dose. Remember, it is twice a day now. Let me get it for you. No, I said a little too sharply. Maya froze. I softened my voice immediately. No, honey, sit down. You are the bride. You shouldn't be waiting on me. I can get my own medicine. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter where I had moved the bottle earlier. I could feel Gavin's eyes boring into my back. He was watching like a hawk. I opened the bottle and shook a yellow pill into my hand. My palms were sweating. If I didn't take it, he would know I suspected something. If I did take it, I would be unconscious in 20 minutes. I turned around facing them. I picked up my glass of water. Gavin was leaning forward in his chair, his eyes locked on my hand. "Bottoms up, Dad," he said, raising his wine glass. "To your health." The audacity of this man. To toast to my health while trying to destroy it. I raised the pill to my lips. I opened my mouth and tossed it in, followed immediately by a large gulp of water. "Good job, Dad," Gavin said, relaxing back into his chair. But the pill wasn't in my throat. In a move I used to do to amuse Maya when she was 5 years old, I had tucked the pill between my cheek and my gum. It was bitter and chalky, but I held it there, keeping my face neutral. I smiled at them. A weak, tired old man's smile. "I think I need to rest my eyes for a bit," I said. "The medicine always makes me a little drowsy." "Of course," Gavin said. "Go lie down. We will clean up here. Save your energy for tomorrow. It is going to be a big day." I walked out of the kitchen, my steps heavy and slow. As soon as I turned the corner into the hallway and was out of their sight, I sprinted silently to the bathroom. I spit the yellow pill into the toilet and flushed it away, watching the yellow swirl disappear. I rinsed my mouth out, scrubbing away the residue. I went into my bedroom and sat in the dark. Downstairs, I could hear them talking. I heard Maya laugh at something Gavin said. It broke my heart. She trusted him completely. She was about to marry a monster, and I was the only one who could see his fangs. I laid down on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The anger was still there, burning in my gut, but now it was cold. It was focused. Gavin thought he had just won. He thought the old man was upstairs drifting into a chemical fog. He thought the path to the money was clear. Let him think that. Let him feel safe. Let him get arrogant. Because tomorrow, when he stands at that altar thinking he owns the world, he is going to find out that this old engineer still knows how to bring a structure down with a single well-placed explosive. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I began to rehearse my speech. Every word had to be perfect. Every pause had to be calculated. Tomorrow was not a wedding. It was an execution, and I was the executioner. The venue for the rehearsal dinner was a place called the Gilded Lily in Upper Manhattan. It was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was dim enough to hide sins, but bright enough to make diamonds sparkle. The walls were lined with velvet, the chandeliers dripped with crystal, and the air smelled of truffles and old money. I walked in wearing the tuxedo Russo had altered for me and immediately felt the temperature drop. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the gaze of 50 wealthy white people turning to look at the only black man in the room who wasn't holding a serving tray. I stood at the entrance for a moment, adjusting my cuffs. I have walked onto construction sites where men were wielding jackhammers and welding torches, and I never felt an ounce of fear. But here, surrounded by silk ties and forced smiles, I felt a different kind of danger. This was not a physical threat. It was a psychological siege. I spotted Maya across the room. She looked breathtaking in a cream-colored cocktail dress, but her smile was tight. She was trying so hard to fit into Gavin's world. She didn't realize yet that to these people she would never be an equal, she would only be an accessory. Constance Whitaker spotted me instantly. She glided over holding a glass of champagne like it was a scepter. She was wearing a silver dress that looked like armor. "Desmond," she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "You made it. We were worried you might get lost on the way. You know how confusing the city can get these days." I looked at her calm and steady. "I navigated the subway system when I was 10 years old, Constance. I think I can find a steakhouse on Fifth Avenue." She let out a high, tinkling laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, you are always so defensive. Come. There are people you simply must meet." She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, pinching my skin through the fabric of my suit. She dragged me toward a group of men standing near the bar. They were tall, silver-haired men with faces flushed from expensive scotch. "Gentlemen," Constance announced, "I would like you to meet Desmond King, Maya's father." The men turned. Their eyes scanned me up and down, assessing my value in a split second. "Desmond is retired now," Constance continued, smiling sweetly, "but he used to work in construction." "Isn't that right, Desmond? He was a laborer on the bridges. It is just so inspiring to meet someone who built this city with their bare hands. Real manual work. So physical. I felt the muscles in my jaw lock. A laborer. I was a structural engineer. I had a degree from City College. I had supervised crews of 200 men. I had calculated load-bearing ratios for suspension bridges that carried millions of people every day. To call me a laborer was not just a mistake. It was a calculated erasure of my intellect. She wanted her friends to see me as a body, not a mind. She wanted them to see a man who lifted heavy things, not a man who solved complex problems. One of the men, a banker named Sterling, peered at me over his spectacles. Hard work indeed. Good for you. Must be nice to rest your back after all those years. I wanted to correct them. I wanted to list my credentials and tell them exactly which bridges I had designed. But then I saw Gavin watching me from the corner. He was sipping his drink, his eyes narrowed, waiting for me to snap. If I got angry, if I raised my voice to correct this woman, I would be the angry, unstable old man they needed for their court case. So I swallowed my pride. It tasted like ash. Yes, I said, keeping my voice low and slow. It was hard work, but honest work. Constance beamed, satisfied that I had accepted my demotion. She patted my arm like I was a well-behaved pet. Go find yourself a drink, Desmond. Just don't overdo it. We know how you get. I walked away, my heart pounding against my ribs. I needed water. My throat was dry from the effort of holding back my rage. But before I could reach the bar, Gavin intercepted me. He wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a man with slicked back hair and eyes that looked like shark eyes. He wore a suit that was too shiny and a watch that was too big. Dad, Gavin said, putting an arm around my shoulder. I want you to meet a good friend of mine. This is Dr. Eris. The man extended a hand. His palm was damp. A pleasure, Mr. King. Gavin tells me you have been under a lot of stress lately. I shook his hand briefly. Dr. Eris. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. Otis, my lawyer, had mentioned him. My lawyer had a psychiatrist who had lost his license twice for overprescribing medication but somehow always managed to get it back. This was the man who was going to sign my competency evaluation. Nice to meet you, I mumbled, letting my hand tremble slightly as I pulled it away. We were just saying you look like you need to relax, Gavin said. He signaled to a waiter. Bring my father the 25-year-old scotch. Neat. A double. I don't drink scotch, Gavin, I said. You know that. It messes with my stomach. Come on, Dad, Gavin insisted, his voice hardening just a fraction. It is a celebration. Just one drink. Dr. Eris here was just telling me how a little alcohol can actually help with circulation. Right, doctor. Absolutely. Dr. Eris said, his voice oily. Especially for a man of your age. It helps calm the nerves, eases the confusion. The waiter arrived with the glass. The amber liquid swirled invitingly, but to me it looked like venom. Gavin picked it up and pressed it into my hand. Drink up, he said. Everyone is watching. You don't want to be rude, do you? I looked around. He was right. People were watching. If I refused, I would look difficult. If I threw it, I would look crazy. I had to play the game. I lifted the glass. I saw Gavin's eyes widen in anticipation. I brought the rim to my lips. The smell of the alcohol was strong. I tilted the glass just enough to wet my lips, but I did not swallow a drop. I held the liquid in my mouth, pretending to savor it, then I pulled the glass away and let out a satisfied sigh. Strong, I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin and spitting the liquid into the cloth while I did it. Good, right? Gavin asked, watching me closely. I nodded, acting a little unsteady. Who is this again? I asked, pointing at Dr. Eris. Did we meet at the hardware store? Gavin exchanged a look with the doctor, a look of triumph. No, Dad, Gavin said, talking to me like I was a toddler. This is Dr. Eris. We just met him 5 seconds ago. Right. The hardware store, I repeated, blinking my eyes rapidly. I think I need to sit down. My legs feel like jelly. Desmond, Dr. Eris said, stepping closer, invading my personal space. Do you know what day it is? I looked at him blankly. It is, Sunday. We go to church on Sunday. It was Friday. Gavin suppressed a laugh. Sure, Dad. It is Sunday. Why don't you go freshen up? The bathroom is over there. Then come back and finish your drink. I nodded, shuffling my feet as I turned away. I walked toward the restrooms, letting my shoulders slump, letting my head hang low. But the moment I pushed through the heavy mahogany door of the men's room and the latch clicked behind me, my posture straightened. The bathroom was empty. It was lined with marble and gold fixtures. I moved quickly. I didn't go to the sink. I went into the handicap stall at the far end, the one with the solid door. I locked it and sat down on the closed lid of the toilet, pulling my feet up so they wouldn't be visible from the floor. I pulled out my phone. My hands, which had been shaking for the show, were now rock steady. I opened the voice recorder app. I had practiced this with Russo all afternoon. Open app, red button, record. I waited. 1 minute passed, then 2. I heard the main door open. 2 pairs of footsteps walked in. Heavy, confident strides. He is completely gone. Gavin's voice echoed off the marble tiles. Did you see his eyes? He thought it was Sunday. Dr. Aris chuckled. The decline is rapid. Or maybe he is just reacting to the cocktail you gave him earlier. Did he take the yellow pill? I watched him take it, Gavin replied. I heard the sound of a zipper, then the stream of urine hitting the urinal. He is cooked. Tomorrow on stage, when the lights hit him, he is going to be a drooling mess. I need him to do more than just drool. Gavin, the doctor said, his voice serious now. To sign that paper, I need a specific incident. Violence, aggression, or a complete physical collapse. If he just falls asleep, the judge might just order bed rest. We need him to look dangerous or incapable. Don't worry, Gavin said. I have a plan for that too. During the toast, I'm going to mention his late wife. I am going to say something that will trigger him. He will lunge at me. And when he does, you will be right there to restrain him. Brilliant, Dr. Aris said. And the fee. Double if we get the signature by Monday, Gavin promised. The brownstone is practically sold. The buyers are just waiting for the title to clear. I sat in the stall holding the phone like it was a holy relic. Every word. I had every single word. The conspiracy, the bribery, the intent to provoke, it was all there recorded in high-definition audio. The water ran in the sink. The hand dryer blasted for a few seconds. Let's get back out there, Gavin said. I want to make sure he finishes that scotch. The door opened and closed. Silence returned to the bathroom. I lowered my feet to the floor. I didn't leave immediately. I played back the recording holding the phone to my ear, hearing Gavin's voice plotting my destruction. It was painful, yes, but it was also liberating, because now I wasn't just a victim. I was a witness. I put the phone in my inside jacket pocket right next to my heart. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. The tired old man was gone. In his place was a structural engineer who had just found the crack in the foundation of the building that was trying to crush him. I splashed cold water on my face. I didn't wipe it off. Let them think it is sweat. Let them think I am terrified. I walked back out into the dining room. Gavin was waiting for me, holding the glass of scotch. Here you go, Dad, he said, smiling that predator smile. You forgot your drink. I took the glass. I looked him dead in the eye. My hand didn't shake this time. Thank you, son, I said, emphasizing the word son with a tone that only he might have found strange if he wasn't so arrogant. I never forget anything. I raised the glass, but I didn't drink. I held it, because tomorrow I wasn't going to be the one swallowing poison. They were. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2 a.m, but sleep was a luxury I could not afford. I sat in my study, the room where I had drawn the blueprints for half the bridges in the tri-state area. The only light came from the green banker's lamp on my mahogany desk and the glow of my computer screen. My house, the brownstone that Gavin and Constance were so desperate to steal, felt different tonight. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress under siege. I pulled the phone from my pocket and played the recording one more time. Gavin's voice plotting my demise echoed in the quiet room. Every time I heard it, the anger didn't flare up anymore. It settled down deep and cold like wet concrete. I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. I needed a weapon. I needed a shark. I scrolled through my old contacts until I found the name. Saul Weinstein. Saul was not a nice man. He was a litigation attorney who ate corporate lawyers for breakfast. He was loud, aggressive, and had a deep-seated hatred for the kind of polite society hypocrisy that the Whitakers represented. We had worked together years ago when a city contractor tried to stiff my engineering firm on a payment. Saul had not only recovered the money, he had legally dismantled the contractor's entire business. He was the only person I knew who would be awake at this hour plotting someone's destruction. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Weinstein. His voice was gravelly and sharp. No hello, no niceties. Saul, it is Desmond King. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Desmond, the man who builds bridges that never fall down. To what do I owe the pleasure of a call at 2 a.m? Did you kill someone or are you planning to? I am planning to bury someone, Saul, but I want to do it legally. I told him everything. I told him about the yellow pills. I told him about the conversation in the fitting room. I played him the recording from the bathroom. For a long time there was silence on the other end of the line. The only sound was the scratching of a pen on paper. When Saul finally spoke, his voice had changed. The amusement was gone, replaced by a cold, professional intensity. Desmond, send me the file, right now, and give me 30 minutes. I have a private investigator on retainer who owes me a favor. If these people are this desperate for your house, there is a reason. People like the Whitakers don't commit felonies for fun. They do it because they are bleeding. I emailed him the audio file. Then I waited. 30 minutes in a silent house is an eternity. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. I thought about Maya sleeping in her old room down the hall. She was probably dreaming about her wedding dress, about dancing with Gavin. She had no idea that the man she loved was a parasite waiting to latch onto her inheritance. My phone rang. It was Saul. Check your email. Desmond, I just sent you a PDF. We found the bleeding wound. I opened the document. It was a financial background check on Gavin Whitaker. The numbers on the screen were staggering. Gavin wasn't the successful tech entrepreneur he claimed to be. He was a gambler, a speculator. He is $5 million in the hole, Desmond, Saul explained. He leveraged everything on a cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed last month. His investors are not the kind of people who send late notices. They are the kind of people who break kneecaps. He has until Monday to come up with a significant lump sum, or he is a dead man walking. I stared at the screen. The timeline made perfect sense. The rush to get married. The sudden need for the conservatorship. The pressure to sell the house immediately. My $8 million brownstone was his lifeline. I wasn't just a father-in-law to him. I was a piggy bank he needed to smash open to save his own skin. But it gets worse, Saul said. Look at the second attachment. I opened the next file. It was a copy of the prenuptial agreement Maya had signed 3 days ago. I remembered that day. Gavin had brought it over saying it was just a formality to protect his tech assets. Maya had laughed and signed it without reading, saying she trusted him. Scroll to page 14, Clause 4B. Saul instructed. I read the legal jargon, my eyes narrowing. In the event of the wife inheriting real estate or liquid assets exceeding $1 million, management of said assets shall automatically transfer to the husband if the wife lacks prior professional experience in real estate management. My hand shook as I held the mouse. He trapped her, Saul. He knew she is a pharmacist. She has no real estate experience. The moment I die or the moment I am declared incompetent and Maya gets power of attorney over my estate, Gavin legally becomes the manager of everything. He could sell this house the next day and Maya couldn't stop him. He didn't just want to steal from me. He wanted to strip my daughter of her birthright. He wanted to leave her penniless and homeless to pay for his own stupid mistakes. Desmond, Saul said, his voice cutting through my rage. We have enough here for an emergency injunction. I can wake up a judge right now. We can have the police at the church tomorrow morning. We can stop the wedding. We can arrest him for attempted poisoning and fraud. Just say the word. I looked at the picture of Maya on my desk. She was 5 years old, sitting on my shoulders laughing. I had spent my life trying to protect her from the harshness of the world. But I realize now that protecting her didn't mean shielding her from the truth. It meant showing her the truth so clearly that she could never look away. If we arrest him now, I said slowly, he will spin it. He will say it is a misunderstanding. He will say, I am a crazy old man who hired a shark lawyer to frame him. Maya is in love with him, Saul. If I drag him away in handcuffs before the wedding, she might blame me. She might think I ruined her happiness. Then what do you want to do, Desmond? Saul asked. I want to destroy him, but I want to do it when he is at his highest point. I want him to think he has won. I want him to stand at that altar looking down at me, thinking he has the house, the money, and the girl. And then I want to pull the floor out from under him in front of his mother, his investors, and the entire world. That is risky, Saul warned. If he says I do, she is legally tied to him. Even if we annul it later, it is messy. He won't get to say, I do, I promised. I will stop it during the objection. But I need you there, Saul. I need you in the front row. And I need you to bring the projector connection for my phone. I could hear the smile in Saul's voice returning. I will be there, Desmond. I will bring the whole firm if you want. This is going to be better than court. I hung up the phone. I looked at the clock. It was 3 in the morning. The sun would rise in 3 hours, the day of the wedding. I went to my closet and pulled out the tuxedo. I ran my hand over the lapel where Russo had sewn the hidden pocket for the microphone. Gavin Whitaker wanted a show. He wanted a performance of a senile old man. Well, I was going to give him the performance of a lifetime. I sat back in my leather chair and waited for the dawn. I didn't feel tired. I felt energized. For the first time in years, I had a project. I had a deadline, and I had a demolition to schedule. The silence of the house was no longer heavy. It was the calm before the explosion. I looked at the empty hallway. "Enjoy your sleep, Gavin," I whispered to the empty room, "because when you wake up, you are walking into a nightmare." The sun rose over Brooklyn like a spotlight hitting a stage. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the silk bow tie of my tuxedo. This wasn't just any suit. It was a suit of armor tailored by Russo. The fabric was midnight blue, barely distinguishable from black, but with a depth that caught the light just right. But the real masterpiece wasn't the fabric. It was the second button on the vest. To the naked eye, it looked like standard black onyx. But inside lay a high-definition camera lens, no bigger than a pinhead connected to a battery pack sewn into the lining of my vest. It was recording everything. I checked the time. 7 in the morning. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 11. 4 hours. 4 hours until the trap I had set would snap shut. I felt a strange sense of calm. It was the same feeling I used to get before a demolition. The explosives were placed, the perimeter was secure, and all that was left was to press the button. But unlike a building demolition where I wanted everything to fall down today, I was going to make sure the truth was the only thing left standing. My phone buzzed on the dresser. It was a text from Saul Weinstein. "I am in position. The projector is wired. Do not let them see you sweat." I smiled. Sweat. I hadn't sweated since 1995. There was a knock on my door. It wasn't the gentle knock of my daughter. It was the sharp, impatient rap of someone who thought they owned the place. "Come in," I said, my voice raspy. I cleared my throat, adding a little tremor for effect. The door opened and Gavin walked in. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine. His tuxedo was flawless, his hair was perfect, and his smile was bright enough to blind a man. But I looked closer. I saw the red veins in his eyes. I saw the slight tremor in his hands. He looked like a man who was running on caffeine and desperation. "Good morning, Dad," Gavin said, breezing into the room. He was holding a tray with a glass of orange juice and a single croissant. "I brought you some breakfast. You need to keep your strength up. Big day today." I turned slowly from the mirror. I hunched my shoulders slightly, shrinking my 6-foot frame to look smaller, more frail. "Thank you, son," I said. I didn't sleep well. The wind kept waking me up. Gavin set the tray down on the small table by the window. His eyes darted around the room, scanning for anything out of place. He was paranoid. "Good. You probably just forgot to close the window properly," he said dismissively. "Here, drink this juice. It is fresh squeezed, lots of vitamin C." I looked at the glass. The liquid was bright orange pulp floating on the surface. It looked innocent, but I knew better. This was the booster dose. The yellow pill from yesterday might have worn off, or he just wanted to make absolutely sure I was incoherent by the time we got to the church. I walked over to the table. I picked up the glass. My hand shook intentionally, causing the liquid to slosh against the sides. "You are too good to me, Gavin," I said, always looking out for the old man. I brought the glass to my lips. I saw Gavin's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. He was watching me with a hunger that was disturbing. He needed me to drink this. His entire future depended on it. I lowered the glass without drinking. "You know, Gavin," I said, staring into the orange liquid, "I was reading the paper this morning. Or maybe it was the internet. I get them confused sometimes." Gavin's patience was thinning. "Drink the juice, Dad. We have to leave in 20 minutes. I ignored him. I saw something interesting. About that digital money. What do you call it? Crypto. Gavin froze. His hand, which had been adjusting his cufflink, stopped mid-air. "What about it?" he asked, his voice tight. The article said something about a crash. I continued tapping my chin as if trying to recall a distant memory. A big crash. Said a lot of people lost millions overnight. Something about an exchange going bankrupt. What was the name? FT something. Gavin's face went white. It wasn't a pale white. It was a sickly gray. His hand jerked and he knocked into the side table. The tray rattled and the croissant slid onto the floor. "That is just noise, Dad," he snapped, his voice cracking. "Fake news. You shouldn't believe everything you read. The market is fine. It is just a correction." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the terror behind his eyes. He wasn't just an arrogant con artist. He was a terrified boy who had played a man's game and lost everything. "Is it?" I asked innocently. "That is good, because I would hate to think of you losing money. Especially now that you are starting a family, you need to be responsible." Gavin let out a short, hysterical laugh. "Responsible? Yeah, I am very responsible. Now drink the damn juice." He picked up the glass and shoved it into my hand. Some of the juice spilled over onto my thumb. It was sticky and cold. "Drink it," he commanded. His mask of the loving son-in-law had slipped. For a second, I saw the real Gavin, the bully, the tyrant. I looked at the glass, then I looked at him. "I will," I said, "but my hands are sticky now. Let me just wash up." I turned toward the ensuite bathroom. "No," Gavin shouted. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Drink it first, then wash. We don't have time for your slow shuffling back and forth." He was panicking. He couldn't let me out of his sight with the glass. I sighed. "Fine. You are so bossy today, Gavin. Just like your mother." I lifted the glass again. I held my breath. I had to time this perfectly. Suddenly, I gasped. I dropped the glass. It hit the thick Persian rug with a dull thud. It didn't shatter, but the juice exploded outward, soaking into the expensive wool and splashing onto Gavin's shiny patent leather shoes. "Oh no," I cried, bringing my hands to my mouth. My fingers, they just gave out. "I am so clumsy." Gavin stared at his shoes. Orange pulp was clinging to the black leather. He looked up at me, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit me. His eyes were black with rage. "You stupid old man," he hissed. I shrank back, widening my eyes in mock fear. "I am sorry, Gavin. I am so sorry. I will clean it up." I reached for a napkin, but he swatted my hand away. "Leave it," he roared. "Just leave it." He stormed into the bathroom, grabbing a towel to wipe his shoes. While his back was turned, I saw my chance, but the glass was empty. I had bought myself time, but I hadn't neutralized the threat. He would just get more. Sure enough, Gavin came back out, his shoes wiped clean, but his temper destroyed. "Sit there," he pointed to the armchair. "Don't move. I am getting another glass. And this time, I am going to hold it to your lips myself if I have to." He marched out of the room, slamming the door. I exhaled. That was close. Too close. I needed a better plan. I looked around the room. I couldn't pour it in the sink, he would check. I couldn't flush it, he would hear. My eyes landed on the large potted fern in the corner of the room. It was a gift from Maya for my birthday last year, a lush green plant that needed watering once a week. Gavin returned in less than 2 minutes. He had a new glass. This one was plastic, a child's cup. The insult was intentional. "Here," he said, thrusting it at me. "Try not to drop this one." He stood directly in front of me, arms crossed. He wasn't going to leave. He wasn't going to look away. I took the cup. The smell of the sedative was faint, but to my heightened senses it reeked of chemicals. "I can't drink it like this, Gavin," I said, my voice whining slightly, like what he snapped. "You are staring at me. It makes me nervous. I have a shy bladder and apparently a shy throat." Gavin rolled his eyes. "Oh my God. Just drink it." "I can't," I insisted. "Not with you looming over me like a vulture. Turn around. Give me some dignity." Gavin let out a groan of frustration. He turned his back to me, facing the door. "Fine. You have 5 seconds. 1, 2. I moved with the speed of a striking cobra. I didn't drink. I didn't pour it in the plant. That would make a noise. Instead, I pulled the large handkerchief from my breast pocket, the one I had lined with a thick layer of absorbent cotton meant for polishing shoes. 3. I poured the juice directly into the handkerchief. The cotton soaked it up instantly. It was heavy and wet, but it didn't drip. 4. I shoved the soggy handkerchief deep into my pocket and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. 5. Gavin spun around. I held up the empty cup. I let out a loud, wet burp. "Delicious," I said, smiling at him. Gavin snatched the cup from my hand. He peered into it, checking for any residue. It was empty. He looked at me suspiciously, scanning my face. "Good," he said. Finally. He tossed the cup into the trash can. "Now get your jacket," he said. "The limo is downstairs." And Desmond. I looked up at him as I buttoned my jacket, feeling the weight of the soaked handkerchief against my ribs. "Yeah, Gavin. Don't say anything stupid today," he said, leaning in close, his breath smelling of mints and fear. "Just smile, wave, and try not to drool. If you embarrass me, I will put you in a home so cheap the nurses won't even speak English." I held his gaze. I didn't blink. "I won't say anything stupid, Gavin." I promised. I will only speak the truth. He didn't catch the double meaning. He just smirked, tapping my cheek with a patronizing pat. "That is a good boy. Let's go." I followed him out of the room. As I passed the mirror, I caught one last glimpse of myself. The camera lens in my button winked in the light. The recording light was blinking silently. I had the evidence. I had the courage. And now, thanks to his arrogance, I had the element of surprise. We walked down the stairs of the brownstone. Constance was waiting in the hallway wearing a hat that looked like a dead bird. She looked at Gavin. "Did he take it?" she whispered loudly. "Every drop," Gavin confirmed, winking at her. "He will be out of it by the time we hit the highway." Constance smiled at me. A shark smiling at a seal. "You look handsome, Desmond," she lied. "Ready for your big day." I nodded, gripping the banister. "More ready than you know, Constance," I thought. We stepped out into the bright morning sun. The limousine waited at the curb like a black hearse. I climbed in. As the door closed, shutting out the sounds of the Brooklyn streets, I felt the heavy, wet lump of the handkerchief in my pocket. It was cold against my skin, a constant reminder of the poison I had escaped. I looked at Gavin and Constance sitting opposite me. They were checking their phones, ignoring me completely. They thought I was fading away. They thought my mind was dissolving into a fog of chemicals. I closed my eyes and let my head loll to the side, pretending to doze off. "He is already crashing," Gavin whispered to his mother. "Look at him." "Lights out," Perfect Constance replied. "Just make sure he can walk down the aisle. We need him upright for the photos." I listened to them plan my demise. I regulated my breathing, keeping it slow and shallow. But inside, my mind was racing. I was going over my speech. I was reviewing the timeline. The limo pulled away from the curb. The game had begun, and they had no idea that the old man in the corner wasn't sleeping. He was hunting. The heavy oak doors of St. Augustine's Church stood before us like the gates to a different world. Inside, the organ was playing the opening notes of the wedding march, a melody that usually brings tears of joy to a father's eyes. But today the music sounded heavy. It sounded like a countdown. I stood in the vestibule with my daughter Maya, holding her arm linked through mine. She looked like an angel in her white lace gown, the long train pooling around her feet like a cloud. But when I looked closer, I saw that the angel was trembling. Maya has always been terrible at hiding her feelings. When she was a little girl and broke a vase, she would walk around with her hands behind her back looking guilty until I asked her what happened. Now at 32 years old, she had that same look. Her skin was pale, and her grip on my arm was tight, painfully tight. This was not the nervous excitement of a bride about to marry the love of her life. This was the fear of a woman who realizes she has stepped onto a train she doesn't know how to stop. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the swelling music. I leaned in close, brushing a stray curl away from her forehead. "What is it, baby girl?" She bit her lip, looking toward the closed doors. "Is it normal to feel like I am making a mistake?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to scream yes. I wanted to grab her hand and run out the side door into the waiting taxi and drive until we hit the ocean. But I couldn't. If we ran now, Gavin would still be out there. The debt would still be there. The threat to my house and her future would still be hanging over us like a guillotine. We had to go through the fire to get to the other side. "Why do you say that, Maya?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and steady. "It is Gavin," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "He has been acting so strange. Last night he didn't come to bed until 3 in the morning. And this morning, while I was getting my hair done, he called me 3 times. He wasn't asking how I was feeling. He was asking if I knew where the deed to your house was kept. He asked if I had the combination to your safe." I felt a surge of cold fury. Even on her wedding day, he couldn't stop. He was so desperate for that money, so terrified of his investors, that he was hounding his bride for financial documents hours before the ceremony. "He told me he just wanted to make sure your papers were in order in case your health declined." She continued, a tear finally escaping and rolling down her cheek. "But Daddy, you are healthy. You are strong. Why is he so obsessed with you dying? Why does he talk about you like you are already gone?" The doors began to creak open. The light from the sanctuary spilled out blinding and golden. Hundreds of faces turned toward us. I could see them all. The rows of Gavin's guests on the left looking polished and rich and bored. The rows of our family and friends on the right looking happy and proud. And in the front row, I saw the back of Gavin's head. He was standing at the altar waiting not for his wife, but for his payday. I turned to Maya. I took both of her hands in mine, ignoring the bouquet of white roses that was trembling between us. Maya listened to me. "Look at me." She looked up, her dark eyes searching mine for an answer. "I am not dying," I said, my voice low and fierce. "I am not going anywhere, and I am not confused. Do you understand me?" She nodded slowly. "I think so. There are things happening today that you don't understand yet," I said, speaking quickly as the coordinator signaled for us to start walking. "Things that will scare you, things that will make you angry, but I need you to promise me one thing." "What is it, Daddy?" she asked, fear flickering in her eyes. "When the storm hits, do not let go of my hand. No matter what Gavin says, no matter what his mother screams, you trust me. You stand by me. Can you do that?" She looked at me, confused by the intensity of my words. She didn't know about the poison. She didn't know about the plot, but she knew me. She knew the father who had sat by her bed when she had the flu, who had taught her how to solve quadratic equations, who had built her a treehouse with his own hands. "I trust you, Daddy," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Then let's go get some justice," I thought to myself. We stepped forward. The flash of cameras erupted like lightning. We walked down the long red carpet. To the guests, we looked like the picture-perfect father and daughter. But inside, I was calculating every step. I was scanning the room. I saw Saul Weinstein sitting in the third row on the bride's side. He was wearing a yarmulke and a sharp gray suit. He caught my eye and gave a barely perceptible nod. His hand was resting on a small black briefcase on his lap, the projector link. I saw Russo sitting near the back, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. He looked terrified. He was probably praying that the camera in my button wouldn't malfunction. And then I looked at the groom's side. Constance Whitaker was sitting in the front row wearing a hat so large it looked like a satellite dish. She wasn't looking at the bride. She was looking at me. Her eyes were narrowed, scrutinizing my gait. She was waiting for the stumble. She was waiting for the slur. She wanted to see the drugs take effect. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin. I walked with the military precision I had learned in the ROTC 50 years ago. Left, right, left, right. I didn't stumble. I didn't sway. As we got closer to the altar, I saw Constance's frown deepen. She leaned over and whispered something to the man next to her, Dr. Aris. The corrupt psychiatrist looked nervous. He checked his watch. By his calculations, I should have been drooling by now. We reached the steps of the altar. Gavin stepped down to meet us. He looked handsome, I had to give him that. But it was the handsomeness of a viper. He reached out for Maya's hand, but his eyes were on me. "You made it," he said, his voice low enough that only we could hear. "I was worried you might need a nap." I smiled at him. It was the smile of a wolf who has cornered a rabbit. "I have never been more awake, Gavin," I said. He flinched. He expected a mumble. He expected confusion. Instead, he got clarity. He looked at me, searching for the glazed look of the sedative. But my eyes were clear and sharp. He pulled Maya's hand from mine a little too roughly. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, turning back to the priest. I took my seat in the front row, right across from Constance. The ceremony began. The priest, a kindly old man who had known Maya since her baptism, began to speak about love and commitment, about two souls becoming one, about honesty and trust. Every word felt like a joke. I watched Gavin. He was sweating. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He wasn't looking at Maya. He was looking at me. Every time our eyes met, he looked away quickly. He was realizing that something was wrong. The drug wasn't working. The plan was drifting off course. I looked at Constance. She had recovered from her initial disappointment. She sat with her back straight, a smug smile playing on her lips. She was probably thinking that even if I wasn't drugged yet, it didn't matter. They still had the numbers. They still had the lawyers. They still had the element of surprise, or so they thought. She caught my eye and winked. A slow, deliberate wink. It was a victory lap before the race was even finished. It said, "You are old, you are weak, and soon everything you built will be mine." I didn't wink back. I just touched the lapel of my jacket, feeling the hard ridge of the camera button. The priest asked everyone to sit. "Marriage is a contract not just between two people, but between two families," he said. "It is a merging of histories, a merging of futures." I looked at Maya. She was standing straight, but her shoulders were shaking. She wasn't crying tears of joy. She was crying because she was scared. She glanced back at me, her eyes pleading. She remembered my words. "Stand by me." The priest turned to Gavin. "Do you, Gavin, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for richer or for poorer?" "For richer," Gavin said quickly, almost cutting the priest off. He realized his mistake and added a nervous laugh. "And for poorer, of course. I do." Constance nodded approvingly from her seat. She was mentally counting the millions in my bank account. "Do you?" "Maya, take this man," the priest continued. Maya hesitated. The silence stretched out. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The air in the church became thin. People started to shift in their seats. Gavin looked at Maya, his eyes widening with warning. "Say it," he mouthed. "I do," Maya whispered. Her voice was so quiet, it was heartbreaking. I gripped the armrest of the pew. Not yet. I had to wait for the right moment. The payoff had to be absolute. The priest smiled, oblivious to the tension that was strangling the front row. "Then by the power vested in me and before God and these witnesses, I am prepared to pronounce you husband and wife. But first, if there is anyone here present who knows of any just cause why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." This was it, the moment in the movies where the hero bursts through the doors. But I didn't need to burst through any doors. I was already there. The silence that followed the question was heavy. Usually this is a formality. A rhetorical pause. Gavin exhaled, thinking he was safe. He turned to look at the congregation, a smirk returning to his face. He thought he had made it. He thought he had crossed the finish line. Constance adjusted her hat, looking bored, ready for the reception and the champagne. I stood up. The sound of my shoes on the stone floor echoed like a gunshot. Gavin spun around. His face went pale. Constance gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. The priest looked over his glasses, surprised. "Desmond, is there something you wish to say?" I walked up the 3 steps to the altar. I didn't look at the priest. I didn't look at the guests. I looked straight at the camera lens that was broadcasting the ceremony to the 2 large screens mounted on either side of the sanctuary. "Yes, Father," I said, my voice booming without a microphone. "There is a cause, a very just cause." Maya looked at me terrified. "Daddy, what are you doing?" she whispered. "I am keeping my promise, Maya," I said. "I am protecting you." Gavin stepped forward, his hands balled into fists. "Sit down, old man," he hissed, his voice shaking with rage and panic. "You are confused. It is the medication. Don't listen to him. He is having an episode." I turned to Gavin. I smiled. And this time it wasn't a polite smile. It was the smile of a man who is about to detonate the bridge. "I am not having an episode, Gavin," I said, reaching into my pocket. "But you are about to have a very bad day." I pulled out my phone. Saul hit it, and the screens went black. The sanctuary was plunged into a confused silence as the screens went black. A murmur rippled through the pews like a sudden wind in a wheat field. People were shifting in their seats, craning their necks, trying to understand if this was a technical glitch or part of the show. I could feel the tension radiating from Gavin standing just a few feet away from me. He was staring at the blank screens, his jaw tight, his eyes darting back and forth. He looked like a man who heard a twig snap in the woods but couldn't see the wolf yet. I took a deep breath. The air in the church smelled of beeswax candles and expensive perfume, but underneath it, I could smell the metallic tang of fear. It was time for the final act of my performance. I needed them to believe I was weak one last time before I showed them exactly how strong I was. I stepped away from the altar and moved toward the lectern where the microphone stood waiting. My first step was steady, but on the second step I let my foot drag slightly against the stone floor. It made a scuffing sound that echoed in the quiet room. I saw Constance out of the corner of my eye. Her head snapped toward me. Her eyes narrowed. She was analyzing my movement like a hawk watching a field mouse. I took another step, and this time I let my shoulder dip. I raised a hand to my forehead, wiping away the imaginary sweat I had splashed there in the bathroom. I let out a low groan, one that the microphone picked up and amplified through the speakers. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of an old man losing his grip on reality. Desmond the priest said, taking a hesitant step toward me. "Are you all right?" I waved him off my hand, trembling violently. I am fine, Father. Father. The lights are so bright. I reached the podium and gripped the wooden edges with both hands as if I were holding on for dear life. I swayed. Just a little at first, then more noticeably. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw pity in the eyes of my friends. I saw confusion in the eyes of Maya. And I saw pure, unadulterated triumph in the eyes of Constance Whitaker. She nudged Dr. Eris with her elbow. I saw her mouth the words, "It is happening." Gavin saw it too. His panic vanished, replaced instantly by the mask of the concerned son. This was his moment. This was the incident he needed for the court papers. If I collapsed now, if I babbled incoherently, he would have his conservatorship by Monday morning. "Dad?" Gavin called out, his voice laced with a fake, frantic worry. "Dad, you don't look good." I leaned into the microphone. My breathing was heavy and ragged. I have something to say. About the house. I let my voice trail off into a mumble. I let my knees buckle. I slid down the side of the podium, my hand knocking the microphone stand so it screeched horribly against the floor. Gavin was on me in a second. He rushed across the altar steps, his coattails flying. He grabbed my arm not to support me, but to restrain me. He turned to the congregation, his face a portrait of staged devastation. "He is having an episode," Gavin shouted to the room. "I told you all, he is confused. He missed his medication this morning. Please someone call an ambulance. My father doesn't know where he is." Constance stood up in the front row. "Oh, my poor Desmond," she cried out, her performance worthy of an Academy Award. "It is the dementia. We tried to keep it private, but it has gotten so bad. Please get him off the stage before he hurts himself." Maya rushed forward, her face pale with terror. Daddy, what is wrong?" Gavin held up a hand to stop her. "Stay back, Maya," he ordered, his voice sharp. "He is delusional. He might be violent. Dr. Eris helped me restrain him. Doctor." Eris, the corrupt psychiatrist, jumped up from his seat and hurried toward the altar, pulling a syringe from his pocket that he had likely prepared for this exact moment. I was slumped against the podium, my head down, watching Gavin's shiny shoes. I heard the murmurs of the crowd turning into gasps of pity. Poor old Desmond. He has lost his mind. What a tragedy for the wedding. Gavin bent down close to my ear. His grip on my arm was painful. His fingernails dug into my bicep. "Nice try, old man," he whispered, his voice a venomous hiss that only I could hear. "But you just handed me the keys to your kingdom. Don't worry. The nursing home has a nice view of a brick wall. That was the spark. That was the ignition. I didn't look up. Not yet. I just tightened my muscles, the muscles that had carried steel beams, the muscles that had poured concrete foundations, the muscles that Gavin Whitaker had severely underestimated. I reached up and grabbed Gavin's wrist. He tried to pull away, but he couldn't. My grip was iron. I felt his pulse hammering under my thumb. I slowly lifted my head. I didn't blink. I didn't shake. I looked him straight in the eye and let the mask fall away. The confused old man vanished. The engineer returned. Gavin tried to jerk his hand back. "Let go, you crazy old... Get your hands off me, boy." My voice didn't tremble. It boomed. It wasn't amplified by the microphone, but it carried to the back of the church with the force of a thunderclap. Gavin froze. His eyes widened. He saw something in my face that terrified him. He saw clarity. I stood up. I didn't struggle to rise. I pushed myself up with one smooth, powerful motion, forcing Gavin to stumble back a few steps. I brushed the dust off my tuxedo jacket. I adjusted my bow tie. I stood at my full height of 6 feet 2 inches, looming over him. "I am not having an episode, Gavin," I said, my voice calm and deadly cold. "I am not confused. I know exactly where I am. I am in the house of God, and I know exactly who you are. You are a thief and a liar." The silence in the church was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Gavin looked around frantically. "He is hallucinating," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Dr. Eris, inject him now." The doctor lunged forward with the syringe. I didn't flinch. I pointed a finger at him, a finger that looked like a loaded weapon. Take one more step, doctor, and I will have the medical board revoke your license before you can cap that needle. And then I will have the police arrest you for assault. Dr. Eris stopped in his tracks. He looked at Desmond. Then he looked at the crowd. He lowered the syringe and backed away. I turned back to the microphone. I picked up the stand and set it upright. I looked out at the guests. I saw Constance standing in the aisle, her mouth open, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. You were all told that I am sick, I said, my voice resonating through the speakers. You were told that I need to be protected, that I need a conservator, that I am a danger to myself. I paused, looking at Maya. She was standing frozen halfway to the altar, her hands covering her mouth. But the only sickness here is greed, I continued. And the only thing I need to be protected from is the man standing right there. I pointed at Gavin. He was shaking his head, backing away. Dad, stop this, he begged, trying to regain control of the narrative. You are ruining Maya's day. We can talk about this later. Just take your pill. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the handkerchief, the one soaked in orange juice and sedative. I held it up. You mean this pill, Gavin? I asked. The one you dissolved in my juice this morning. The one you swapped in my medicine cabinet yesterday. I threw the soggy handkerchief at his feet with a wet splat. I didn't drink it, I said. And I didn't drink the scotch last night either. Gavin looked at the handkerchief, then at me. His face was the color of old paper. You, he stammered. I turned to the projection screen that was still black. I am a structural engineer, I said, addressing the crowd. I don't build anything without checking the foundation first. And when I checked the foundation of this marriage, I found rot. I found termites. I looked up at the projection booth where Saul was waiting. Saul, if you would be so kind. Play Exhibit A. The screen flickered to life. The image was grainy at first, a low-angle shot from a hidden camera. It took a moment for everyone to realize what they were seeing. It was the inside of a fitting room. The velvet curtain was visible. Then the audio kicked in. It was crystal clear. The voice of Constance Whitaker filled the church, shrill and unmistakable. I do not want to wait until he kicks the bucket to get that money. That brownstone in Brooklyn is the only thing standing between us and bankruptcy. Gasps erupted from the pews. Constance let out a strangled cry and grabbed the back of the pew for support. Then Gavin's voice boomed through the sanctuary. Don't worry, Mother. The paperwork is ready. We just need to prove he is mentally incompetent. Once the court grants us the conservatorship over Maya, she gets control. And since Maya does whatever I tell her to do, we get the house. Maya let out a sob, a sound of pure heartbreak. She looked at Gavin not with love, but with horror. The video continued. I replaced them with high-dose sedatives, Gavin's recorded voice bragged. By the time the ceremony starts, he won't just be tired. He will be slurring his words. He will be stumbling. The video cut to the scene in the bathroom from the rehearsal dinner. Double if we get the signature by Monday, Dr. Eris's voice said. I signaled to Saul to cut the feed. The screen went black again, but the damage was done. The truth hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I looked at Gavin. He was trembling, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He looked at the guests, then at his mother, then at Maya. It is he shouted, his voice desperate and shrill. It is a deep fake. He made it up. He is crazy, I tell you. I stepped down from the altar and walked toward him. He shrank back, but he had nowhere to go. Computers can fake a voice, Gavin, I said quietly, but they can't fake a debt. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and pulled out the financial report Saul had given me. $5 million, I said, holding the papers up. That is what you owe. That is why you are here. Not for love. Not for Maya. But for a bailout. I turned to my daughter. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Maya, I said softly, I told you I would protect you. I am sorry it had to be this way, but you needed to see the wolf without his sheep's clothing. Maya looked at Gavin. She looked at the man she had planned to spend her life with. And in that moment, I saw the girl die and the woman be born. She straightened her back. She wiped her tears. Is it true? She asked Gavin. Her voice was steady, cold. Gavin reached for her. Maya, baby. Listen to me. Your father is trying to ruin us. He is jealous. Is it true? She screamed the words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Gavin flinched. He looked at the papers in my hand. He looked at the angry faces of the guests. He looked at the exit. I did it for us, he whispered. That was all she needed to hear. I turned back to the microphone one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I apologize for the interruption. There will be no wedding today. But if you would like to stay, I believe the police are waiting outside to escort the groom to his reception at the precinct." As if on cue, the sirens we had arranged began to wail in the distance, getting louder and louder. Gavin looked at me with pure hatred. "You ruined everything," he spat. "No, Gavin," I said, buttoning my jacket. "I just fixed the glitch." I walked over to Maya and held out my hand. "Ready to go home, baby girl?" I asked. She looked at Gavin one last time, then she took my hand. "Yes, Daddy," she said. "Let's go home." The video on the giant screens was not a professional production. It was grainy and dark shot from the angle of a buttonhole on a vest, but the audio was perfect. It was the kind of high-fidelity sound that cuts through a room and silences every other noise. The first thing everyone heard was the sharp click of high heels on a wooden floor. Then came the voice. It was Constance Whitaker. There was no mistaking that haughty upper-crust accent that she wore like a badge of honor. But in the recording, the politeness was gone. It was replaced by a raw, hungry greed that made my skin crawl even hearing it a second time. "I do not want to wait until he kicks the bucket to get that money," the voice of Constance boomed through the church speakers. "That brownstone in Brooklyn is the only thing standing between us and bankruptcy." A collective gasp went through the congregation. It started in the back rows and swept forward like a wave. I watched the faces of the guests. The wealthy business partners of the Whitakers, men and women who had spent their lives insulating themselves from ugliness, looked as if someone had just slapped them. They were hearing their own friend, their peer, plotting a crime with the casualness of ordering lunch. On the screen, the camera shifted slightly as I had moved in the fitting room. It captured a sliver of Gavin's profile through the curtain gap. "Don't worry," Mother Gavin's voice replied, dripping with arrogance. "The paperwork is ready. We just need to prove he is mentally incompetent. Once the court grants us the conservatorship over Maya, she gets control. And since Maya does whatever I tell her to do, we get the house. We sell it next week, pay off my investors, and nobody is the wiser." I looked at Maya. She was standing frozen at the altar, her bouquet of white roses hanging limp in her hand. Her face was drained of all color. She looked like a statue of a bride, beautiful but lifeless. The words hit her like physical blows. "Maya does whatever I tell her to do." It wasn't just a betrayal of her father. It was a betrayal of her intelligence, her autonomy, her very soul. But the recording wasn't done. It had one more knife to twist. "But the judge will need proof." Gavin Constance's voice came again, shrill and anxious. "That is why tomorrow is so important," Gavin said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "I switched his blood pressure medication this morning. I replaced them with high-dose sedatives. By the time the ceremony starts, he won't just be tired. He will be slurring his words. He will be stumbling. He might even wet himself on stage. Everyone will see it. It will be undeniable proof that poor Desmond King has lost his mind." The church erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was outrage. People were standing up. Someone shouted, "Shame." I saw one of my old friends from the union, a bricklayer named Marcus, stand up and point a thick finger at Gavin. "You dirty rat," he yelled, his voice shaking the rafters. Constance Whitaker reacted with the desperation of a trapped animal. She lunged out of her pew. Her hat had gone askew, giving her a manic, disheveled look. She rushed toward the projector cart that was set up near the side of the altar, screaming, "Turn it off! Turn it off! Right now! It is illegal! You cannot play this!" She reached for the power cord, her manicured claws ready to rip the machine apart, but she never made it. A figure stepped into her path. It was Saul Weinstein. My lawyer stood like a boulder in a stream. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise a hand. He just stood there, arms crossed, blocking her way with an impenetrable wall of legal authority. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mrs. Whitaker." Saul said, his voice calm but loud enough for the front rows to hear. "That is evidence in an active criminal investigation. Tampering with it would be a felony. And frankly, considering what we just heard, you really don't need another felony on your list today." Constance stopped. She looked at Saul, then at the angry crowd, then at her son. She realized she had lost control. She shrank back, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She looked at her friends, the elite of New York society, silently begging for support, but they were all looking away. They were checking their phones, examining their shoes, doing anything to distance themselves from the woman who had just been exposed as a monster. I turned my attention to the center of the storm. Maya. She hadn't moved. She was staring at Gavin. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. It was the look of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. She was processing the last 3 years of her life, rewriting every memory, every I love you, every promise. She was realizing that the man she loved didn't exist. He was a character played by an actor, and the play had just ended. Gavin was shaking. Sweat was pouring down his face, ruining his expensive makeup. He looked at Maya, his eyes pleading. He tried to step toward her, reaching out a hand. Maya. Baby, please, he stammered. His voice was high and thin, stripped of all its usual confidence. Don't listen to this. It is fake. It is a deep fake. You know about AI. You know what technology can do these days. The old man, he hired someone. He hired hackers to create this voice. He hates me, Maya. He has always hated me. He is trying to frame me. He looked around the room, desperate for anyone to believe him. Tell them, Dr. Eris. Tell them I would never do this. Dr. Eris, who had been inching toward the side exit, froze. He looked at Gavin, then at the camera lens I was pointing at him, then at the angry crowd. Self-preservation kicked in. I don't know anything about this, the doctor mumbled, backing away. I was just hired to observe. I have never seen this man before in my life. Gavin's jaw dropped. The betrayal of his accomplice was the final nail in the coffin. I stepped closer to Gavin. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to see the man he had called a battery, a deepfake Gavin. I asked, my voice low and dangerous. You think I used artificial intelligence to generate a conversation about my specific heart medication, about the specific debt you owe? I reached into my inside pocket again. I pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was the yellow pill I had saved. Is this a deepfake too? I asked, holding it up for everyone to see. Or is this the generic sedative you bought from a back-alley pharmacy because you were too cheap to pay for the real thing? Gavin stared at the pill. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a fish on dry land, gasping for air. And what about the debt? Gavin, I continued, relentless. $5 million. Due on Monday. Is that AI, or is that the result of you gambling away money that wasn't yours on a crypto exchange that didn't exist? Maya finally moved. She took a step back away from Gavin. It was a small step, but it put an ocean of distance between them. She looked at him with a clarity that was terrifying. You called me stupid, she whispered. Her voice was shaking not with fear, but with a rage that had been buried for too long. In the recording, you said I was stupid. You said I would do whatever you told me. Gavin flinched. That was the one accusation he couldn't spin. That was the one that cut through the legalities and the finances and went straight to the heart. No, baby, that was out of context, Gavin babbled, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. I was just telling my mother what she needed to hear to get off my back. You know how she is. I love you, Maya. I love you more than anything. Maya looked at Constance, who was cowering behind her large hat. Then she looked back at Gavin. She looked at the man she had defended to me 1,000 times, the man she had changed her hair for, changed her clothes for, changed her life for. You don't love me, Gavin, she said. Her voice gained strength with every word. You love my father's house. You love the safety net. You love the idea of a wife who doesn't ask questions. She reached up to her veil. With a slow, deliberate motion, she unpinned it. The white lace fell to the floor, landing on the cold stone next to the soggy handkerchief I had thrown earlier. But I have a question now, Gavin, she said, her eyes burning into his. Gavin looked hopeful for a split second. Anything, Maya. Anything. Ask me. Did you really think, she asked, her voice echoing in the silent church, that the daughter of Desmond King, the man who built half the bridges in this city, wouldn't know how to spot a crack in the concrete? She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were tears of relief, tears of awakening. Daddy, she said, her voice breaking, you were right. You were right about everything. I opened my arms. She ran to me, burying her face in my chest. I held her tight, feeling her sobs rack her body. I looked over her head at Gavin. He was standing alone at the altar, a groom without a bride, a con man without a mark. The video on the screen ended, leaving the church in a stunned silence. But the truth was still ringing in everyone's ears. The image of the perfect couple had been shattered, replaced by the ugly reality of exploitation. And then a slow clapping started. It was Russo standing in the back. Then Marcus joined in. Then another friend. Then my cousins. Soon half the church was applauding. They weren't applauding the wedding. They were applauding the truth. They were applauding a father who had fought for his child. Gavin looked around wild-eyed. He realized the game was over. He turned to run, heading for the side door of the sacristy. Going somewhere, Mr. Whitaker, a deep voice boomed from the entrance. 2 police officers stepped into the doorway, their badges gleaming in the church light. Behind them was the detective I had met with Saul earlier that morning. Gavin Whitaker, the detective said, walking up the aisle. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Fraud, attempted poisoning, and elder abuse. And Mrs. Whitaker," he added, looking at Constance, "we have a few questions for you too." The applause died down, replaced by the grim satisfaction of justice being served. I held my daughter, stroking her hair. "It is over, baby girl," I whispered. "The nightmare is over. Now we wake up." "You claimed it was a deepfake, Gavin," I said, my voice steady and calm, cutting through the chaos of the sanctuary. "You claimed I used artificial intelligence to put words in your mouth. You claimed I am a senile old man confused by technology." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The police officers at the back of the church held their ground, giving me the space I needed. They knew the law was on my side, but they also understood that some justice needs to be delivered publicly before it is delivered legally. I opened the thick manila folder I had been holding under my arm. The sound of the paper rustling was the only noise in the room. "Let us look at the hard copy evidence." Then I continued. "Because while you can argue about voice recordings, you cannot argue with a certified bank statement from the Cayman Islands." I pulled out a sheet of paper covered in red ink. $5 million, Gavin. That is the hole you dug for yourself. You bet against the market and the market crushed you. You didn't love my daughter? You looked at her and saw a life raft. You looked at my house and saw a liquidation sale. Gavin was shaking his head violently, sweat flying from his brow. "That is a lie," he screamed. "That is forged. I have assets. I have investments. You have nothing." I interrupted, my voice rising just enough to drown him out. "I spoke with your investors this morning, the ones you have been dodging for weeks. They were very interested to hear that the wedding was delayed. In fact, I believe one of them is parking his car outside right now." Gavin's eyes widened in genuine terror. The threat of prison was one thing, but the threat of the loan sharks he had borrowed from was something else entirely. He looked at Maya pleadingly. "Maya, please. It is a misunderstanding. It is just a liquidity issue. I can fix it. I just need time." I stepped between him and my daughter, shielding her from his desperation. "You don't have time, Gavin," I said. "And you don't have a wife either." I pulled the final document from the folder. This was the one Saul had found at 4 a.m, the one that had made even my cynical lawyer gasp. "You see, Gavin, when you apply for a marriage license in New York, you have to swear under oath that you are currently unmarried." I held up the document. It was a marriage certificate. It looked standard except for the seal. It wasn't an American seal. It was Canadian. "Who is Vanessa LeBlanc?" I asked. The color drained from Gavin's face so completely that for a moment I thought he might faint. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The silence stretched out painful and heavy. "Who is she, Gavin?" I repeated louder this time. She is nobody," he whispered. "She is your wife," I roared, throwing the paper at his feet. "You married her 4 years ago in Toronto. You never filed for divorce. You walked away from her just like you planned to walk over us." A collective gasp went through the church that was louder than anything before. Bigamy. It wasn't just a lie. It was a crime. It meant that even if I hadn't stood up, even if the priest had finished the ceremony, this marriage would have been null and void the moment it started. Maya stared at the paper on the floor. She looked at the date. She looked at the names. "You are married," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of a collapsing world. "You are already married." Gavin tried to reach for her. "Maya, listen, it is not what you think. We are separated." "I thought the papers went through. It was just a clerical error." "A clerical error," I scoffed. "A clerical error is a typo, Gavin. Leaving a wife in another country is a lifestyle choice. You were going to make my daughter a mistress on her own wedding day." I turned to the crowd. I looked at the wealthy friends of the Whitaker family, the people who had looked down on me at the rehearsal dinner. "This is the man you trusted," I told them. "This is the man you did business with. A man who would commit a felony in a church just to pay off a gambling debt." The shame in the room was palpable. People were looking away, unable to meet my eyes. The facade of their polite society had been shattered by the truth of a blue-collar engineer. And that is when Constance snapped. She had been standing by the pew trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. She had watched her son be exposed. She had watched her financial rescue plan burn to ashes. She had watched her reputation evaporate in front of the very people she tried so hard to impress. But she didn't blame Gavin. She didn't blame her own greed. She blamed me. She let out a scream that sounded less like a human and more like a banshee. She lunged into the aisle, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You ruined everything," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You ungrateful, miserable little man." She marched toward the altar, ignoring the police, ignoring the gasps of her friends. She stopped just a few feet from me, breathing heavily. "We were doing you a favor," she spat. "We were elevating this family. We were giving your daughter a name that actually means something in this city. And this is how you repay us, by humiliating us, by digging up dirt like a common pig." I looked at her calmly. I didn't move. I let her unravel. "We don't need your name, Constance," I said quietly. "The name King was built on honest work. That is worth more than any title you bought with borrowed money." That was the breaking point. The veneer of civilization cracked and the ugly rot underneath spilled out. She stepped closer, her eyes bulging. "You think you are so smart, don't you?" she hissed. "You think because you bought a suit and learned to read a spreadsheet you are one of us, but you are not. You never will be." She took a breath, and then she screamed it. The words that had been hiding behind her polite smiles and her backhanded compliments for years. "You are just a dirty black savage," she screamed, the racial slur echoing off the holy walls of the church. "You are a filth that polluted my son's future. You should have stayed in the gutter where you belong." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. It was a vacuum. Even Gavin looked shocked. He stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. The wealthy white guests in the groom's section looked horrified. There is a line in modern society, a line of plausible deniability that people like Constance love to dance on, but she had just crossed it. She had ripped off the mask and shown the world the ugly, racist heart beating underneath. Maya let out a sob of pure shock. She stepped back, clutching my arm. I didn't flinch. I didn't yell back. I stood there looking down at this woman who thought her skin color made her royalty and mine made me a servant. I felt a strange sense of peace, because now everyone knew. Now there was no more pretending. I adjusted my cuffs, slowly, deliberately. "Thank you, Constance," I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. She blinked, confused by my reaction. "Thank you," I repeated, "for showing my daughter exactly who you are. For years you made her feel small. You made her feel like she had to change to fit into your world. You criticized her hair, her clothes, her way of speaking, and she thought it was because she wasn't good enough." I looked at Maya, then back at Constance. But now she knows. It wasn't because she wasn't good enough. It was because you are small. You are small, and you are hateful, and you are empty. I gestured to the stunned crowd. "Look around you, Constance. Nobody is looking at you with respect anymore. They are looking at you with pity. Because they see what I see. A woman who has nothing left but her hate." Constance looked around. She saw the faces of her social circle turning away. She saw the disgust. She saw the judgment. "No," she whispered, backing away. "No, you don't understand. He provoked me. He—" "That is enough, Mrs. Whitaker." The detective stepped forward. He walked past Gavin and stopped in front of Constance. He took a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We have the recording of the fraud conspiracy," Detective Miller said. "But I think we can add hate speech and disorderly conduct to the list now." He spun her around. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. "Get your hands off me!" Constance shrieked, struggling uselessly. "Do you know who I am?" "I am Constance Whitaker." "You are a suspect currently under arrest, ma'am," the detective said, dragging her toward the exit. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it." Another officer moved toward Gavin. "Gavin Whitaker, you are under arrest for bigamy, fraud, and attempted assault." Gavin didn't fight. He looked at Maya one last time. His eyes were dead. "I am sorry," he whispered. Maya looked at him. She looked at the man being handcuffed, the man who was married to another woman, the man who had tried to drug her father. "Don't be sorry, Gavin," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Be gone." We watched as they were led out of the church. The mother and son who had walked in like royalty were dragged out like criminals. The heavy doors slammed shut behind them, leaving only the echo of their disgrace. I turned to the congregation. I am sorry for the disruption, I said. I know you all came for a wedding. I looked at the altar where the priest was still standing, mouth agape, holding the Bible. But sometimes I continued looking at my daughter who was wiping her tears and standing taller than she ever had before. Sometimes you have to burn down the house to kill the rats. Maya squeezed my hand. I looked at the empty space where Gavin had stood. The nightmare was over. The fever had broken. Let's go home, Dad, she said. And for the first time in months, I knew that home would actually be safe. The air in the church was thick with the dust of a collapsed empire. The police officers had their hands on Gavin's shoulders, ready to drag him away, but the scene wasn't over. Not yet. There was one person who hadn't spoken, one person whose silence had been the loudest thing in the room for the last 10 minutes. Maya. My daughter stood at the altar looking at the man she had loved for 3 years, the man who had promised to cherish her, the man who was actually married to a woman in Canada and had planned to sell her childhood home to pay off a gambling debt. The shock that had frozen her face was melting away, but it wasn't being replaced by tears. It was being replaced by fire. I watched her hands. They were clenched into fists at her sides, shaking with a rage that had been suppressed for too long. For years I had watched Gavin and Constance chip away at her confidence. It was never a direct attack. It was always subtle. A comment about her hair being too wild and needing to be straightened. A suggestion that her skin was too dark for certain colors. A laugh when she gave an opinion on politics, followed by a pat on the head and a, "You're so cute when you try to be serious." They had turned my brilliant, vibrant daughter into a shadow of herself. They had gaslit her into believing she was lucky that they accepted her. But now the gaslight had been turned off, and in the harsh light of the truth, Maya was finally seeing the monsters standing in front of her. "Wait," Maya said. Her voice was low, but it stopped the police officers in their tracks. They looked at her, sensing the volatility in the air. Maya Gavin pleaded, sensing a glimmer of hope. He tried to step toward her, but the officers held him back. "Baby, please. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. I was going to fix it. I was going to divorce her. I just needed time." Maya walked toward him. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace that terrified him. She stopped just inches from his face. She looked deep into his eyes, searching for the man she thought she knew. But all she found was a terrified stranger. "You told me my hair was unprofessional," she said quietly. Gavin blinked, confused by the non sequitur. "What?" "You told me my natural hair was unprofessional," Maya repeated, her voice gaining strength. "You said I should straighten it for the wedding photos because your mother wanted a cleaner look." "Maya, that's not," Gavin stammered. "And last month," she continued, relentless, "when I got that promotion at the pharmacy, you didn't say congratulations. You said, 'Are you sure you can handle the stress? You know how emotional you get.'" She tilted her head, looking at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. "You weren't worried about my stress, Gavin. You were worried about my strength. You spent 3 years trying to make me feel small so I would fit inside the little box you built for me. You tried to make me doubt my own mind so I wouldn't notice you were picking my pockets." She raised her left hand. The diamond ring on her finger sparkled under the church lights. It was a massive stone one that Constance had claimed was a Whittaker family heirloom from the 19th century. "And this," Maya said, looking at the ring, "you told me this was your great-grandmother's. You told me it was priceless." I stepped forward then. I hadn't wanted to interrupt her moment, but there was one last nail to put in the coffin. "Maya," I said gently, "check the inscription inside the band." She looked at me, then took the ring off her finger. She held it up to the light, squinting at the inner curve of the metal. "It doesn't say Whittaker," I told her. "It says made in China. And that stone isn't a diamond, it is moissanite. I had a jeweler look at the insurance photos you sent me. It is worth about $200. Maya looked at the ring, then at Gavin. The lie was so petty, so unnecessary, yet so symbolic of their entire relationship. Everything was fake. The love, the promises, the family history, even the jewelry. It was all just costume jewelry and cubic zirconia disguised as royalty. Gavin hung his head. He had run out of excuses. He had run out of lies. Maya laughed. It was a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "I felt so lucky," she whispered. "I felt so lucky that a man like you wanted a woman like me. That's what your mother always said, isn't it? That I was marrying up." She looked over at Constance, who was standing by the exit in handcuffs, fuming silently. But you weren't marrying down Gavin. You were starving. And I was the meal. She clenched the ring in her fist. She drew her arm back. You want the ring? She asked. Gavin looked up, hope flaring in his eyes again. Maybe she was just giving it back. Maybe there was still a chance for negotiation. Here, she screamed. Take it. She threw the ring. She didn't just toss it. She hurled it with every ounce of strength in her body. The heavy metal band struck Gavin right on the cheekbone just below his eye. Gavin yelped, flinching back as a small cut opened up on his face. The ring bounced off him and skittered across the stone floor, spinning wildly before coming to rest in the gutter near the pews. Nobody moved to pick it up. Maya stepped closer, invading his personal space, her eyes blazing with a fire that could burn down cities. You wanted a conservatorship, Gavin, she asked, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You wanted to stand in front of a judge and tell them I was incompetent. You wanted to control my life, my money, my decisions. She smiled, and it was the scariest smile I had ever seen on my sweet daughter's face. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized she is at the top of the food chain. Well, you are in luck, she hissed, because I am going to be very involved in your legal proceedings. Gavin looked at her, confusion mixing with his fear. What do you mean, Maya said, leaning in so close her nose almost touched his. I am not going to be your wife, but I will be your witness. She pointed a finger at his chest, poking him hard with every word. I will be the witness who testifies about the emotional abuse. I will be the witness who hands over every text message, every email, every bank transfer you tried to hide. I will be the witness who looks the judge in the eye and tells them exactly how you tried to drug my father. She stood back, straightening her spine, looking 10 feet tall. I am going to protect you, Gavin, she said, her voice dripping with irony. I am going to protect you from ever hurting another woman again. I am going to protect society from you. I will make sure you get the maximum sentence. I will make sure you rot in a cell where the only thing you control is what time you turn out the lights. She turned to the police officers. Get him out of my sight, she commanded, before I forget that I am a lady and finish what that ring started. The officers nodded, their faces grim with respect. Let's go, Whitaker, one of them said, shoving Gavin toward the door. Gavin stumbled, his legs weak. He looked back at Maya one last time, his eyes filled with regret. But it wasn't regret for hurting her. It was regret for losing the game. Maya didn't look back. She turned around and walked toward me. She didn't run. She didn't collapse. She walked with the steady, rhythmic stride of a queen. She reached me and took my hand. Her palm was warm and dry. She squeezed my fingers and I squeezed back. I am sorry I didn't listen to you sooner, Daddy, she whispered. I pulled her into a hug, kissing the top of her head. You listened when it mattered, baby, I said. You woke up. That is all that counts. I looked over her shoulder at the empty doorway where the police had taken the trash out. The church was quiet now. The drama was over. But as I looked at my daughter standing strong in her ruined wedding dress, I knew that her story was just beginning. She had walked into this church a victim. She was walking out a survivor. And God help anyone who tried to mess with the King family again. The sirens outside weren't just background noise anymore. They were a symphony, a loud, wailing symphony that signaled the end of the Whitaker charade. The heavy wooden doors of the church, which had been closed to seal us in with lies, were pushed open with a heavy thud. The light from the street spilled in, cutting through the dim, candlelit atmosphere of the sanctuary. 2 uniformed officers stepped in first, their hands resting near their belts, their faces impassive. Behind them walked Detective Miller. I had met Miller years ago on a job site where some equipment was stolen. He was a good man, a man who didn't care about the cut of your suit, only the content of your character. Today he looked like the Angel of Death if the Angel of Death wore a cheap polyester suit and carried a badge. Gavin saw them and his knees actually knocked together. I had read about that in books, knees knocking in fear, but I had never seen it happen in real life. It was pathetic. He looked at the open side door of the sacristy, thinking about running, but another officer had already moved to block that exit. He was trapped. The rat was finally in the cage. Detective Miller walked down the center aisle. His footsteps were heavy and deliberate. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He knew, and I knew, that the game was over. The guests who were still standing in shock from Maya's explosion parted like the Red Sea to let him pass. They stared at him, then back at Gavin, connecting the dots in real time. Miller stopped at the base of the altar steps. He looked up at Gavin, then nodded at me. "Mr. King Miller," said his voice rough like gravel. "Sorry we're late. Traffic on the bridge." "You're right on time, detective," I replied, stepping back to give him room. Miller turned his gaze to Gavin. Gavin tried to straighten up, tried to summon some of that arrogant tech bro confidence he had worn so easily an hour ago. But the mask was shattered. He just looked like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, except the cookie jar was a $5 million fraud scheme. "Gavin Whitaker," Miller asked, though it wasn't really a question. "This is a misunderstanding," Gavin squeaked. His voice cracked. I can explain. It's a civil matter. It's a dispute between business partners. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a wedding, for God's sake." Miller pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "I have a warrant here issued by the district attorney's office," Miller said calmly. "It lists bank fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. And thanks to the evidence Mr. King provided this morning, we're adding attempted assault and administering a controlled substance without consent." Gavin's face went white. He looked at Constance. "Mother, do something. Call the senator. Call anyone." Constance was shaking. She was still in shock from being called out by Maya by the room, but the sight of the police snapped her back to reality. She lunged forward, grabbing Miller's arm. "You cannot arrest him," she shrieked. "Do you know who we are? We are the Whitakers. My husband built the skyline of this city. You are making a terrible mistake, officer. I will have your badge. I will have your pension." Miller looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at it with the same expression one might look at a piece of gum stuck to a shoe. "Ma'am, take your hand off me," Miller said. His voice was low, dangerous. "Or you'll be joining him in the back of the cruiser for obstruction of justice." Constance snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. She stepped back, clutching her pearls, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Miller signaled to the uniformed officers. "Secure him." The officers moved up the steps. Gavin tried to back away, stumbling over the train of Maya's discarded wedding dress. It was a poetic image tripped up by the very symbol of the woman he tried to use. "Don't touch me," Gavin yelled, swatting at the officers. "I didn't do anything." "It's him. It's the old man. He's crazy. He's framing me." One of the officers, a burly man who looked like he wrestled bears on the weekend, grabbed Gavin's wrist and spun him around. He slammed Gavin's chest against the stone altar, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to knock the wind out of him. "Gavin Whitaker, you are under arrest," the officer recited the Miranda rights, the words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." While the officer cuffed him, the metallic click of the handcuffs sounding sweeter than any wedding bell I had ever heard, Miller stepped forward to conduct the search. He patted down Gavin's tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a wallet, a phone, and then from the inside breast pocket he pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. Miller held it up to the light. He squinted at the label. "Diazepam." Miller read aloud. 50 milligrams. Prescribed to Mrs. Constance Whitaker. The detective looked at Constance, then back at Gavin. "Funny," Miller said dryly. "I didn't know you suffered from your mother's anxiety, Gavin. Or is this the special medication we heard about on the tape?" Gavin was struggling against the cuffs, his face pressed against the cold stone. "That's not mine. I was holding it for her. She gets nervous in crowds." Miller uncapped the bottle. He poured a few pills into his gloved hand. They were yellow, the exact same shade of yellow as the pill I had saved, the exact same shade of yellow as the residue in my handkerchief. Miller looked at me. I nodded. "That's a lot of anxiety," Miller said, capping the bottle and placing it into an evidence bag. "And a lethal dose if mixed with the wrong heart medication." A gasp went through the room again. Seeing the bottle, the physical proof was different from hearing a recording. It made it real. It made it tangible. This wasn't just a financial crime. This was attempted murder. This was a son-in-law trying to kill a father-in-law on the altar. The guests in the front rows, the Whitakers' high society friends, began to stand up and back away. They were distancing themselves physically, creating a wide circle around the family they had been toasting just last night. I saw the banker Sterling actually turn his back and start walking toward the exit, checking his phone, probably calling his PR team to scrub any connection to Gavin. Constance saw this retreat. She saw her world crumbling. "Wait!" Constance cried out to her friends. "Sterling, Margaret, don't leave. This is a setup. You know us, you know we wouldn't do this." But they didn't stop. They didn't turn around. They walked out, leaving her alone on her island of disgrace. Miller turned to Constance. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "we'll need you to come down to the station for questioning regarding the contents of this bottle and your voice on that recording." "I am not going anywhere with you," Constance spat. "I am a victim here. I decided it was time to intervene." I walked over to where she was standing. She looked small now. The grand dame of New York society had shrunk into a frightened, bitter old woman. Her hat was crooked. Her makeup was smeared. She looked at me with pure venom, but I saw the fear behind it. I stood in front of her. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I had the high ground, the moral ground, and the legal ground. "Constance," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. She looked up at me, her lip curling. "What do you want, you miserable?" I held up a hand, silencing her. "Save it," I said. "Save it for the jury. They might be more impressed by your theatrics than I am." I looked around the church at the beautiful stained glass, at the flowers, at the space that was supposed to be a celebration of love. "You came into my life thinking you could bulldoze me," I said. "You thought because I work with my hands I couldn't use my head. You thought because I live in Brooklyn I am beneath you." I leaned in closer. "But let me tell you something about Brooklyn, Constance. We don't like trespassers, and we really, really don't like thieves." I pointed to the door. "You are leaving this party," I said. "You are leaving this church. And once the police are done with you, you are going to leave my family alone forever." "Desmond, please," she started to whimper, changing tactics, trying to play the fragile widow card. "We can settle this. I can pay you. I have money and trust." I laughed. It was a harsh barking sound. "You don't have any money, Constance," I reminded her. "That's why we're here. Remember, you're broke. You're morally bankrupt and financially bankrupt." I turned to the police officer nearest to her. "Officer," I said, "this is a private event, and this woman is no longer on the guest list. I'd like her removed for trespassing." The officer nodded. He stepped forward and took Constance's elbow. He wasn't rough, but he wasn't gentle either. He was firm. "Let's go, ma'am," the officer said. "No, get off me!" Constance screamed. She dug her heels in. She looked at Gavin, who was being hauled up the aisle by the other officers. "Gavin, tell them to stop." But Gavin wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his shoes. He was weeping. He was broken. The officer began to escort Constance out. She struggled her heels, skidding on the stone floor. She looked back at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. She couldn't process that she, a Whitaker, was being thrown out by Desmond King. As she passed me, she hissed one last insult. "You'll regret this. You'll rot in hell." I watched her go. I watched her struggle against the inevitable. "I'm already in heaven, Constance," I said to her, retreating back, "because I'm watching the trash get taken out." The police marched them up the aisle. It was the reverse of a wedding procession. Instead of a bride and groom walking toward a future, it was a mother and son walking toward a cell. The flash of cameras went off, but this time it wasn't the wedding photographer. It was the guests. People were filming. This would be on the news by evening. The downfall of the Whitaker family would be broadcast in high definition. I turned back to the altar. Maya was standing there watching them go. She looked like a soldier who had survived a bombing, shaken, covered in dust, but alive. I walked up to her. I took her hands in mine. "Are you okay?" I asked. She took a deep breath. She looked at the empty doorway where Gavin had vanished. "I don't know," she whispered. "I feel light." "Light is good," I said. "Light means the burden is gone." Detective Miller walked back toward us. He tipped his hat to Maya. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way, Miss King," he said, "but your father, he's a hell of an investigator, better than some of my guys." Maya looked at me, a small smile touching her lips. "He builds things," she said, "and he knows how to take them apart." Miller handed me a card. "We'll need statements from both of you later," he said. "But for now, go home, get some rest. We have enough to hold them for a long time." "Thank you, Detective," I said, shaking his hand. Miller turned and walked out, his job done. The church was quiet now. The organist had long since fled. The priest was sitting in a pew drinking a glass of water, looking traumatized. I looked at the guests who remained my family, my friends, the people from the neighborhood. They weren't leaving. They were waiting. They were waiting to see if we were okay. I raised my voice one last time. "Folks," I said, "I know you came for a celebration, and I'm sorry we didn't give you a wedding, but I think we still have reason to celebrate." My cousin Marcus stood up. "Celebrate what, Desmond? The wedding is off." I looked at Maya. She was standing tall, her head held high. "We celebrate freedom," I said. "We celebrate dodging a bullet. And we celebrate the fact that the kings don't bow down to anyone." A cheer went up. It started small, but it grew. People were clapping, hugging. It wasn't the party we planned, but it was the party we needed. I looked at Maya. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "The reception hall is paid for, the food is there, the band is there." Maya wiped her eyes. She looked at her ruined dress. She looked at the empty spot on her finger where the fake diamond used to be. She smiled. A real smile. "I want cake, Daddy," she said. "And I want to dance with my father." I offered her my arm. "Then let's go," I said. "I think the DJ knows some Motown." We walked down the aisle together, not as a bride giving herself away, but as a daughter returning to the father who never gave up on her. We stepped out into the bright sunlight of Brooklyn, leaving the darkness behind us in the fitting room locked away forever. The silence in the grand ballroom was heavier than the noise of the sirens had been. 10 minutes ago, this room was supposed to be filled with 300 guests, dancing and drinking champagne. Now it was just a cavern of wasted money. The crystal chandeliers were still blazing overhead, casting a brilliant light onto round tables set with fine china and polished silver. But the chairs were empty, the dance floor was pristine, and the band had packed up their instruments and left through the service entrance, leaving only the hum of the industrial air conditioning to fill the void. I stood near the entrance, holding my tuxedo jacket over my shoulder. My tie was undone, hanging loose around my neck. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the ceremony, the confrontation, and the arrest was finally fading. In its place was a bone-deep exhaustion. I felt every one of my 72 years. My knees ached. My hands felt heavy. But my mind was clear. I looked across the room to the head table. It was set on a raised platform decorated with an arch of white orchids that probably cost more than my first car. Sitting there all alone in the center of that floral extravagance was Maya. She was still wearing her wedding dress, though the train was gathered up in a messy pile on the floor next to her. She had kicked off her heels. Her head was resting on her arms, which were folded on the crisp white tablecloth. Her shoulders were shaking. The sound of her weeping was soft, a low, mournful keen that echoed off the empty walls. I walked toward her. My footsteps on the marble floor sounded loud and intrusive. I walked past the buffet tables, where huge silver platters of lobster and prime rib sat untouched, getting cold. I walked past the 5-tier wedding cake, a towering monument of fondant and sugar that no one had cut. It looked ridiculous now, a celebration for a marriage that had been dead on arrival. I climbed the steps to the platform and pulled out the chair next to her, the chair that was meant for the groom. I sat down. Maya didn't look up. "I am so stupid," she whispered into her arms. Her voice was muffled thick with tears. "I am so incredibly stupid." I reached out and placed my hand on her shoulder. I could feel the tension in her muscles, the knots of stress that had been tightening for months. "You are not stupid, Maya," I said quietly. "You were in love. And love has a way of putting a filter over our eyes. It makes the red flags look just like flags." She sat up then, turning to look at me. Her face was ravaged. Her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark streaks. Her eyes were red and swollen. But it was the look in those eyes that broke my heart. It was a look of total devastation. Not just sadness, but shame. Deep, burning shame. "How did I not see it, Daddy?" she asked, her voice cracking. "How did you see it all? And I saw nothing. He was stealing from you. He was married to someone else. He was drugging you. And I was worrying about table settings. I was worrying about whether his mother liked my hair." She let out a bitter laugh and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I let them treat you like dirt," she said. "When Constance made those comments about your job, about your clothes, I didn't stop her. I just tried to smooth it over. I tried to keep the peace. I betrayed you, Daddy. I chose them over you." I took a napkin from the table and handed it to her. "You didn't betray me, Maya," I said firmly. "You were surviving. That is what people like the Whitakers do. They don't attack you all at once. They chip away at you. A little comment here, a little criticism there. They isolate you. They make you feel like you are lucky to be in their orbit. I poured a glass of water from the crystal pitcher on the table and pushed it toward her. "Drink," I said. "You have been crying for an hour. You need to hydrate." She took the glass, her hands trembling slightly. She took a sip, then looked at me over the rim. "I am so sorry," she whispered again. "I am so sorry. I didn't believe you. When you started speaking in the church, for a second I thought you were crazy. I thought Gavin was right. I doubted my own father." I leaned back in the groom's chair, crossing my legs. I looked at the empty hall, at the wreckage of the day. "Maya, listen to me carefully," I said. "I want you to remember this feeling, not the pain, but the lesson." She nodded, sniffing. "You are beating yourself up because you didn't see the knife," I said. "You are angry because you let him in, but that is how predators work." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table and looking deep into her eyes. "The most dangerous enemy in this world is not the man who stands in front of you holding a gun," I said, my voice low and serious. "When a man holds a gun, you know he is your enemy. You can run, you can fight, you can hide. The danger is visible." I gestured to the empty chair where Gavin should have been. "No, the most dangerous enemy is the man who sits at your table, the man who smiles at your jokes, the man who holds your hand, the man who picks up a silver spoon and feeds you your favorite soup, all while slipping a few drops of poison into every bite." Maya stared at me, the tears slowing as she absorbed the words. "He fed you poison." "Maya," I continued. "Not the chemical kind he gave me, but emotional poison. Doubt. Insecurity. Fear. And he did it with a smile. He did it while saying, 'I love you.' That is why you didn't see it. Because nobody looks for poison in the hand that feeds them." Maya looked down at the table, tracing the pattern on the tablecloth with her finger. "He almost killed you," she whispered. "If you had taken those pills." "But I didn't," I said. "Because I know the taste of poison. I learned it a long time ago. And now you know it too." I stood up and walked over to the wedding cake. I picked up the silver knife that was lying on the table beside it. It was engraved with their names and the date, a souvenir of a lie. "I hate to see good food go to waste," I said, looking at the cake. It was vanilla bean with raspberry filling, my favorite. I cut a huge slice, a slice that defied all rules of wedding etiquette. It was messy and large and crumbling. I put it on a plate and walked back to Maya. "Here," I said, placing it in front of her. She looked at the cake, then at me. A small, bewildered smile touched her lips. "Daddy, we can't eat the wedding cake," she said. "There was no wedding." I cut a slice for myself, an even bigger one. "This isn't wedding cake," I said, taking a bite. "This is victory cake. This is we didn't lose the house cake. This is my daughter is free cake." Maya let out a laugh. It was a watery, shaky sound, but it was real. She picked up a fork and took a bite. She closed her eyes. "It is good," she admitted. "It is delicious," I agreed. "And the best part is we don't have to share it with Constance." We sat there in the silence of the empty ballroom, two survivors eating cake in the ruins of a disaster. The tension that had held us apart for months finally dissolved. We weren't fighting anymore. We weren't tiptoeing around a narcissist's ego. We were just a father and a daughter sharing a quiet moment. After we finished, I stood up and offered her my hand. "Come on," I said. "Let's go home." Maya stood up. She looked at her dress. "I can't go home in this," she said. "It feels like wearing a costume." I took off my tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was oversized on her, swallowing her up in black silk. "Wear this," I said. "Cover up the bad memories." We walked out of the ballroom, leaving the lights on, leaving the lobster to spoil, leaving the wreckage behind. We walked out the back door into the cool night air of the parking lot. The valet was gone. My old sedan was parked near the entrance, looking humble and sturdy compared to the limousines that had filled the lot earlier. I opened the passenger door for Maya. She slid in, pulling my jacket tighter around her. As I drove us away from the venue toward the bridge that would take us back to Brooklyn, Maya fell asleep. Her head rested against the window, her breathing slow and even. I drove in silence, watching the city lights blur past. I thought about Gavin sitting in a holding cell, probably still trying to talk his way out of it. I thought about Constance realizing that her social currency had no value in the booking room. And then I looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully beside me. We had won. It had been a long, ugly battle, but we had won. I reached over and turned on the radio, low, just a hum of jazz to keep me company. The storm was over. The night was long, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the morning. I knew that when the sun rose tomorrow, it would shine on a house that was truly ours, a house with no secrets, no debts, and no poison. I steered the car onto the bridge, the tires humming against the asphalt. We were going home. 3 months had passed since the day I stopped the wedding. You would think that after being arrested in front of 300 people, Gavin and Constance Whitaker would have the decency to disappear. You would think that shame would drive them into hiding. But I learned a long time ago that people like them don't feel shame. They only feel entitlement. And when you take away what they think is theirs, they don't apologize. They attack. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in March when the process server knocked on my door. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a bored college kid in a windbreaker, but the thick envelope he handed me was a declaration of war. I opened it at the kitchen table while Maya made coffee. I read the cover letter and I felt my blood pressure rise. It wasn't a criminal summons. It was a civil lawsuit. Gavin and Constance Whitaker were suing me. Maya looked over my shoulder and gasped. Defamation, illegal recording, invasion of privacy. Daddy, they are suing us for $10 million. I kept reading. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction. They claimed that the recording in the fitting room was obtained illegally, violating their expectation of privacy. They claimed that my accusations of bigamy were unproven and malicious, causing Gavin irreparable professional harm and severe emotional distress. They claimed that I had manipulated the video evidence. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what would stick. I called Saul Weinstein immediately. We met in his office an hour later. Saul looked tired. He had the papers spread out on his desk. They hired firm of Fletcher and Sterling. Saul said, rubbing his temples, "They are sharks, Desmond. Expensive sharks. They are going to argue that the fitting room was a private space, making the recording inadmissible in court. If the judge agrees, the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine applies. The recording goes away, and without the recording, it is your word against theirs." "But what about the truth?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. "Gavin is a bigamist. We have the marriage certificate. They are arguing that the marriage certificate is a forgery," Saul explained. "Or that Gavin believed he was divorced. They are going to drag this out for years, Maya. They are going to drain your father's bank account with legal fees until he has no choice but to settle. That is their strategy. They don't want justice. They want a payout." I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. The rain was hammering against the glass. I thought about Constance Whitaker. I could imagine her sitting in her lawyer's office wearing a new hat, thinking she had finally outsmarted the laborer. She thought this was a game of attrition. She thought she had deeper pockets than I did. She was wrong. I turned to Maya. "Do you trust me?" I asked. She looked at me surprised. "Of course, Daddy. Then I need you to go wait in the reception area for a moment. I need to discuss something with Saul." Client privilege. Maya hesitated, then nodded and left the room. When the door clicked shut, I reached into my briefcase. I didn't pull out a legal document. I pulled out a black leather portfolio that I hadn't opened in 20 years. I slid it across the desk to Saul. "Saul," I said, "I want you to look at this." Saul opened the portfolio. He adjusted his glasses. He read the first page, then he read the second. His eyes grew wide. He looked up at me, then back at the papers. "Desmond," he whispered, "is this real?" "It is real," I said. The documents were share certificates, not for a small local business, but for Apex Structural Materials, one of the largest construction supply companies on the East Coast. "Back in 1982, I explained, leaning forward, "I was working on a bridge project. We had a problem with the concrete cracking in the cold. I developed a new mixture, a composite that could withstand extreme temperature shifts. The company I worked for didn't have the cash to pay me a bonus, so I asked for equity. I asked for founding shares." Saul did the math in his head. "You own 15% of Apex Materials." "Desmond, do you have any idea what their stock is trading at right now?" "I know exactly what it is trading at," I said calmly. "I have never touched the dividends. I reinvested everything. I live simply, Saul. I like my brownstone. I like my old car. I never needed the flash. But I have the firepower." Saul let out a low whistle. "You are not just a retired engineer. You are a whale. A silent whale." "I need you to make some calls, Saul," I said, my voice hardening. "The Whitakers are trying to launch a new luxury condo project in Jersey City to pay off their debts. That is their last lifeline. They need concrete. They need steel. And they need it on credit because no bank will touch them right now." I stood up and walked to the window. Call the CEO of Apex, I instructed. Tell him his founding partner is calling in a favor. Tell him that Apex Materials is not to sell a single bag of cement to any company associated with Gavin or Constance Whitaker. And tell him to pass the word to our steel suppliers, too. I turned back to Saul. I don't want to fight them in court, Saul. I want to fight them in the marketplace. They want to sue me for $10 million. Fine. I am going to make sure they can't even afford the stamp to mail the summons. Saul grinned. It was a predatory grin. I like this, Desmond. I really like this. This isn't a legal defense. This is a siege. Make the call, I said. 2 days later, the phone rang in my kitchen. It wasn't a lawyer. It was Constance Whitaker. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later. Her voice started out angry, then turned frantic. Desmond, we need to talk. There has been a misunderstanding with our suppliers. They are saying our accounts are frozen. They are saying we are blacklisted. You have to stop this. You don't know who you are messing with. I didn't call her back. A week later, we were scheduled for a preliminary hearing at the courthouse. I wore my best suit, not a tuxedo this time, but a charcoal gray wool suit that screamed authority. Maya walked beside me. She looked nervous, but she held her head high. We walked into the conference room where the deposition was to take place. Gavin and Constance were already there. They looked terrible. Constance was wearing the same dress she had worn to the rehearsal dinner, but it looked loose on her now. Gavin looked like he hadn't slept in a month. Their lawyer, a slick man in a $3,000 suit named Mr. Fletcher, stood up. Mr. King, he said smoothly, we are prepared to discuss a settlement. My clients are willing to drop the defamation suit if you agree to a public apology and a payment of $2 million to cover their emotional distress. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it just came out. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Mr. Fletcher, I said, I think you are misinformed about the situation. I signaled to Saul. He slid a single piece of paper across the table to Fletcher. What is this? Fletcher asked, picking it up. It is a list, Saul said. A list of every construction supplier, every concrete mixer, every steel fabricator, and every architectural firm within a 500-mile radius that has just declined to work with your clients. Gavin snatched the paper. His hands were shaking. Apex, he stammered. United Steel, Global Glass. These are the biggest vendors in the industry. They all rejected us. I looked at Gavin. I locked eyes with him. You wanted to play big league ball, Gavin, I said softly. You wanted to talk about assets and leverage. Well, welcome to the big leagues. Constance stared at me. She was connecting the dots. She was realizing that the man she had called a savage, the man she had mocked for having dirt under his fingernails, actually owned the dirt she was trying to build on. Who are you? She whispered. Who are you really? I am the man who built the bridge you are trying to burn. Constance, I replied. I leaned forward. Here is my counteroffer, I said. You will drop this lawsuit immediately. You will sign a confession admitting to the attempted poisoning and the fraud, and you will leave New York. If you don't, I won't just freeze your supply chain. I will buy the mortgage on your apartment. I will buy the debt on your car. I will buy the very building your lawyer is sitting in right now. I have the resources to make sure you never sign a contract in this country again. The room went silent. Mr. Fletcher looked at his clients. He looked at the list of rejected suppliers. He realized he was fighting a war with a water pistol against a nuclear submarine. He closed his briefcase. I think we need a recess to consult with my clients, Fletcher said, his voice losing its confident edge. You have 5 minutes, I said, checking my watch. After that, I call the bank that holds the note on your Jersey City project. They scrambled out of the room like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Maya looked at me, her eyes wide with wonder. Daddy, she whispered. You own Apex Materials. Why didn't you ever tell me? I took her hand. Because money is a tool, Maya, not an identity. I said, I didn't want you to grow up thinking you were special because we were rich. I wanted you to be special because you were good. She squeezed my hand tight. They are going to fold, aren't they? She asked. I looked at the closed door where the Whitakers were undoubtedly screaming at each other. They have no choice, I said. They built their house on sand. We built ours on rock. And today, the tide just came in. 5 minutes later, Fletcher came back alone. He looked defeated. My clients have agreed to withdraw the lawsuit with prejudice, he said quietly. They are prepared to sign the admission of guilt regarding the fraud in exchange for you not pressing further civil charges. And they are moving to Florida next week. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Smart choice, I said. Tell them to enjoy the sunshine. And tell them if I ever see them in Brooklyn again, the price of concrete goes up. I walked out of the courthouse with my daughter. The sun had broken through the rain clouds. The streets of New York looked clean and bright. I took a deep breath of the city air. It smelled of exhaust and pretzels and victory. We did it, Daddy Maya said, linking her arm through mine. We didn't just win, baby girl, I said, hailing a cab. We cleared the site. Now we can finally start building something real. We got into the cab, whereto the driver asked. Brooklyn, I said, the brownstone. As the car pulled away, I looked back at the courthouse one last time. The legal battle was over. The Whitakers were finished. But I knew that the real work was just beginning. Healing my daughter, rebuilding our trust, and enjoying the quiet peace of a life lived on our own terms. And maybe, just maybe, buying a new suit. I had a feeling I might be invited to a lot more board meetings from now on. The glass walls of the conference room on the 45th floor offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. But Gavin Whitaker was not looking at the view. He was sweating. I watched him from the monitors in the adjacent room, my hand resting on the control panel. He was pacing back and forth, adjusting his tie, checking his watch, and wiping his palms on his trousers. He looked like a man who was drowning and had just seen a piece of driftwood. He thought he was here to meet with the managing director of Keystone Ventures, a private equity firm that specialized in distressed assets. He thought he was going to charm them with his buzzwords and his smile. He thought he was going to get a bridge loan to save his failing company and keep his penthouse. He had no idea that Keystone Ventures was a shell company. He had no idea that the sole shareholder was a retired engineer from Brooklyn who knew a thing or two about structural integrity. I adjusted my cufflinks. I took a sip of water. I signaled to the receptionist. Send him in, I said into the intercom. I walked into the main boardroom and sat in the large leather chair at the head of the table. I spun it around so my back was facing the door. I wanted him to see the view first. I wanted him to see the city he thought he owned before he saw the man who actually owned him. The heavy door opened. I heard Gavin's footsteps. They were hesitant. Hello, he called out, his voice pitching slightly high. Mr. Sterling, thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I know my portfolio looks a bit volatile right now, but I assure you it is just a temporary liquidity crunch. I didn't turn around yet. I let him talk. I let him dig the hole a little deeper. I have a new project in Jersey City. Gavin continued, his confidence growing in the silence. Luxury condos, high-end retail. The market is begging for it. Once we break ground, the pre-sales alone will cover the debt service. I just need a lifeline. $5 million, that is all. It is a drop in the bucket for a firm like Keystone. I smiled at the reflection in the window. A lifeline. He didn't want a lifeline. He wanted a miracle. And what about the legal issues? The voice of my lawyer, Saul Weinstein, asked from the corner of the room. We heard rumors of fraud. Bigamy. Gavin laughed. It was a nervous, dismissive sound. Oh, that is all cleared up. Just a misunderstanding with a difficult ex-father-in-law. He was senile, confused. We settled out of court just to make him go away. It has no bearing on my ability to run a company. That was the trigger. He called me senile again. He called the destruction of my daughter's heart a misunderstanding. I tapped the armrest of the chair. Is that so? I said, my voice low and gravelly. Gavin stopped. The room went silent. He recognized the voice. Mr. Sterling, he asked, uncertainty creeping in. I slowly spun the chair around. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I looked at him with the flat, emotionless gaze of a banker foreclosing on a property. Hello, almost son-in-law, I said. Gavin stumbled back as if he had been physically struck. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. His face went from flushed to chalk white in a heartbeat. You, he whispered. What are you doing here? Where is Mr. Sterling? Mr. Sterling is an employee, Gavin, I said, gesturing to the empty seat at the other end of the table. I am the owner. Gavin looked around the room, his eyes wide with panic. You own Keystone. But that is impossible. You are a construction worker. I am the man who buys bad debt, I interrupted. And yours, Gavin, is the worst debt I have ever seen. I picked up a thick file from the table and dropped it with a heavy thud. Your investors were desperate, Gavin. They wanted out. They were terrified of the fraud charges. They were terrified of the bankruptcy. So when Keystone Ventures offered to buy your debt for 10 cents on the dollar, they didn't just say yes. They thanked me. I leaned forward, steepling my fingers. Do you know what that means, Gavin? He shook his head, mute with shock. It means I am not your father-in-law, I said. I am not your victim. I am your senior creditor. I own your company. I own your outstanding loans. I own the shirt on your back. And as of this morning, I slid a foreclosure notice across the polished mahogany table. I own the penthouse. Gavin looked at the paper. It was an immediate eviction notice. No, he gasped. You can't. That is my home. My mother lives there. Your mother lives in a property that was used as collateral for a business loan that is now in default, I corrected him, cold and precise. The terms of the loan were very specific. In the event of a criminal indictment or a failure to secure insurance, the lender has the right to accelerate the debt and seize collateral immediately. I stood up and walked over to him. He shrank away from me, terrified. You have no insurance, Gavin, I said. Nobody will insure a fraud, and you certainly have an indictment, so I am calling in the loan. But where will we go? He pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. We have nowhere. The accounts are frozen. I looked at him, and for a brief second I remembered the day he asked for my daughter's hand. I remembered how he had looked me in the eye and promised to take care of her. I hear Florida is nice this time of year, I said, echoing his lawyer's words. Or maybe you can stay with your wife in Canada. Oh wait, I heard she filed for an annulment yesterday. Gavin sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. Why are you doing this? He sobbed. You have the money. You have the power. Why do you have to destroy us completely? Isn't it enough that you stopped the wedding? I walked to the window, looking out at the city that Constance Whitaker claimed her husband had built. It is not about revenge, Gavin, I said softly. It is about restitution. I turned back to him. You tried to take my house. You tried to put me in a home. You tried to steal my dignity because you thought old people were useless. You thought we were just resources to be drained. I picked up the phone on the conference table. Security, I said into the receiver. Please escort Mr. Whitaker out of the building and make sure he hands over his key fob. 2 large guards entered the room. They hauled Gavin up by his arms. He was limp, defeated, a broken man. As they dragged him to the door, he looked back at me one last time. What are you going to do with it? He asked, his voice hollow. The penthouse. Are you going to live there? Are you going to move into my home just to spite me? I laughed. Live there, I asked, in that mausoleum of bad taste. No, Gavin. I have a home, a real home in Brooklyn. I walked over to the architectural model of the city that sat in the corner of the room. I pointed to the building where his penthouse was located. I am donating it, I said. Gavin blinked, confused. Donating it? To who? A charity. To the King Center for Elder Justice, I said, savoring the words. I walked closer to him so he wouldn't miss a single syllable. I am turning your luxury bachelor pad into a legal aid clinic, a place where old people like me can come for free legal help when predators like you try to scam them. Gavin's jaw dropped. The irony hit him like a physical blow. His sanctuary of greed was going to become a fortress against greed. Every time you walk past that building, Gavin, I continued, relentless. Every time you look up at those windows, I want you to remember that it is no longer a place where plans are made to hurt people. It is a place where people are protected from you. The guards pulled him through the doorway. Goodbye, Gavin, I said. He didn't answer. The doors closed, sealing him out of his old life forever. I stood alone in the boardroom. I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the hot rush of anger I had felt in the church. It was the cool, steady hum of a job well done. It was the feeling of seeing a bridge pass its final safety inspection. I picked up my phone and dialed Maya. Daddy, she answered on the first ring. Did it happen? It is done, baby girl, I said, watching the traffic far below. How did he take it? She asked. About as well as expected, I said. But the important thing is the papers are signed. The King Center is a go. I could hear her smile through the phone. "I am so proud of you, Daddy," she said. "I am proud of us," I said. I packed up my briefcase. I took one last look at the view. The city looked different from up here. It looked orderly. It looked manageable. I walked out of the office. I didn't need to stay. I had a brownstone to get back to. I had a garden to tend. And I had a life to live. A life that belonged to me and no one else. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored doors. I straightened my tie. Desmond King I whispered to myself, "You still got it." The elevator descended, taking me back down to the ground, back to the earth, back to the real world where concrete and steel and truth were the only things that mattered. And I was ready for whatever came next. They say living well is the best revenge, but I have to admit that watching your enemies live poorly is a close second. I didn't actively stalk Gavin and Constance Whitaker. I didn't need to. When people fall from that height, the crash makes a sound that echoes all over the city. But 6 months after the non-wedding, I decided to take a drive. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for closure. I drove my old sedan out to a neighborhood in the far reaches of Queens. It was a place where the subway line ended and the buildings were gray boxes of crumbling brick. I parked across the street from a basement apartment building. The windows were barred and a neon sign for a 24-hour laundromat flickered buzzing incessantly right next to their front door. I watched as Gavin Whitaker came home. He wasn't driving a luxury car. He wasn't even taking a taxi. He was riding an electric bicycle wearing a neon green vest with the logo of a food delivery app on the back. It was raining a cold, miserable drizzle and he was soaked to the bone. The man who had worn a $3,000 tuxedo to try and steal my house was now peddling sandwiches to pay his rent. He locked his bike to a rusty railing, fumbling with the chain because his hands were shaking from the cold. He looked thin. Not the fit Jim honed thin of his past life, but a gaunt, hollowed-out thinness that comes from stress and cheap food. As he opened the door, I could hear the voice of Constance Whitaker drifting up from the basement. Even stripped of her wealth, she hadn't lost her volume. "You are late," she shrieked. Her voice sounded raspy like a smoker's cough. "The landlord was here again, Gavin. He says if we don't pay the extra security deposit by Friday, he is putting our things on the curb." I watched Gavin stop in the doorway. He didn't rush inside to comfort her. He slumped his shoulders. "I am working, Mother," he yelled back, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "I just did 12 deliveries in 4 hours. What did you do? Did you sit there and complain to the television?" I sat in my warm car feeling a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction. They were trapped together. That was their true punishment. Prison would have separated them. It would have given them time apart. But this cramped, damp basement apartment where they had to look at each other every day, was a far worse sentence. Every time Gavin looked at Constance, he saw the woman who pushed him into a crime he couldn't pull off. Every time Constance looked at Gavin, she saw the son who failed to secure her retirement. They were eating each other alive. I rolled down my window just an inch to hear better. "I did not raise you to be a delivery boy," Constance screamed. "I raised you to be a CEO. You had it all, Gavin. You had the girl, you had the house, and you threw it away because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about that wife in Canada." "Shut up," Gavin roared. "Just shut up. You were the one who wanted the penthouse. You were the one who told me to drug him. If you hadn't been so greedy, we could have just waited. But no, you had to have it now." The door slammed shut, muffling their argument but not silencing it. I could still hear the thuds of things being thrown, the accusations, the bitterness. They were stuck in a loop of misery, blaming each other for a fire they both started. I rolled up the window. I had seen enough. The wolf had been reduced to a stray dog, and the queen had become a pauper. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving them to the hell they had built for themselves. I drove back toward Brooklyn, crossing the bridge as the rain cleared up. The contrast when I arrived at our neighborhood was striking. The brownstones looked warm and inviting. The trees were beginning to turn gold for autumn, and on the corner of the main avenue there was a new sign hanging above a freshly painted storefront, King Community Pharmacy. I parked the car and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed a bright, welcoming sound. The air inside didn't smell like damp basements or desperation. It smelled of antiseptic clean linen and peppermint. The floors sparkled. The shelves were stocked with precision. And behind the high counter stood the owner. Maya was wearing a crisp white lab coat. Her hair was natural, a halo of curls that framed her face beautifully. She wasn't wearing heavy makeup to hide her features anymore. She looked like herself. She looked powerful. She was on the phone talking to a supplier. I leaned against a shelf and listened. "No, Gary," she said, her voice firm and uncompromising. I saw the invoice. "You charged me for expedited shipping, but the delivery arrived 2 days late. I am deducting the shipping cost from the check." There was a pause as the man on the other end tried to argue. Maya didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to be nice to keep the peace. "Gary, listen to me," she said, cutting him off. "We are running a business here, not a charity. If you can't guarantee the delivery times, don't charge the premium rates. If you have a problem with that, I have a list of 3 other distributors who would love to have my account. Do we understand each other?" She waited. Then she smiled. A sharp professional smile. "Good. Send the corrected invoice. Have a nice day." She hung up the phone and looked up, seeing me. Her face softened, but the strength remained in her eyes. "Hi, Daddy," she said, coming around the counter to give me a hug. She smelled like soap and success. "I watched you handle that guy," I said. "You were tough." "I learned from the best," she said, winking at me. "And I learned the hard way. I am done letting people overcharge me for things I didn't ask for." I looked around the store. It was beautiful. We had used the money from my dividends to set it up, but Maya had insisted on doing the work herself. She negotiated the lease. She hired the staff. She designed the layout. This wasn't a gift I gave her. It was an empire she was building. "How are the numbers?" I asked, walking with her toward her small office in the back. "Better than projected," she said, handing me a tablet. "We are already breaking even on the front-end merchandise, and the prescription volume is up 20% since last month. People like coming here. They like that we listen." I looked at the graph on the screen. It was a steep, upward curve. "You know," I said, handing the tablet back, "Gavin called me yesterday." Maya froze for a second. It was the first time we had mentioned his name in weeks. She didn't look scared. She didn't look sad. She just looked annoyed. "What did he want?" she asked, rearranging a display of vitamins. "He wanted to borrow $500, I said. "He said his bike broke down and he couldn't work. He said he was hungry." Maya stopped moving. She stood there holding a bottle of calcium supplements. She thought about it for a long moment. "What did you tell him?" she asked. "I told him I didn't have any cash," I said. "But I told him there is a food pantry on 4th Street that serves a hot meal at 6 o'clock. Maya nodded slowly. "Good," she said. "Did I receive a thank you note?" she asked, looking at me. "No," I said. He hung up. Maya put the bottle back on the shelf. She turned to me and her expression was serious. "I used to think that helping people meant giving them whatever they asked for," she said. "I thought saying no was mean, but I realize now that giving Gavin money would just be feeding the parasite. He needs to learn how to survive on his own, just like I did." She walked over to her desk and picked up a framed photo. It wasn't a picture of her and Gavin. It was a picture of us taken on the day of the failed wedding. We were eating cake in the empty ballroom, laughing. "I am glad he is gone, Daddy," she said, tracing the frame. "I am glad he showed me who he was, because if he hadn't, I might have spent the rest of my life trying to be small enough to fit in his pocket." She looked up at me and her eyes were shining. "I am not small anymore," she said. "No, baby girl," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "You are giants." The bell on the door chimed again. A customer walked in, an elderly woman leaning on a cane. "Hello, Mrs. Higgins." Maya called out, her voice warm and professional. "Your prescription is ready. And I checked with the doctor about that interaction we were worried about. You are good to go." I watched her work. I watched her treat Mrs. Higgins with respect, with patience, with kindness. But it was a kindness with boundaries. It was the kindness of a woman who knows her own worth. I walked to the front of the store and looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over Brooklyn. Somewhere in Queens, Gavin and Constance were probably fighting over a can of soup. But here in this pharmacy, the lights were bright, the air was clean, and the future was wide open. I thought about the journey we had taken. From the fitting room to the courtroom to this showroom. It had been painful. It had been expensive. But looking at my daughter standing tall in her white coat, I knew it was the best investment I had ever made. I turned the sign on the door from open to closed. "Ready to go home?" I asked. Maya finished with the customer and took off her lab coat. "Yeah," she said, grabbing her purse. "I am starving. Let's get pizza." "Not delivery," I said, smiling. Maya laughed. "No," she said. "Definitely not delivery. Let's go pick it up ourselves." We walked out into the cool evening air, leaving the pharmacy secure behind us. We walked down the street side by side, two kings in their kingdom. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back over my shoulder. There was nothing behind us worth looking at. Everything we needed was right here, walking forward. It has been exactly 365 days since I stood in that church and watched the illusion of my daughter's happiness shatter into 1,000 pieces. A year is a long time in the life of an old man, but it is an even longer time in the life of a young woman who is rebuilding herself from the ground up. We were walking through Prospect Park. The leaves were turning that deep burning orange that always signals the true arrival of autumn in New York. The air was crisp, the kind of weather that makes you want to button your coat a little tighter and walk a little faster. But we were taking our time. Maya was walking beside me, holding a cup of hot cider. She wasn't the same woman who had walked down the aisle trembling in fear. She walked with a different cadence now. Her stride was longer, her head was higher. She was wearing a trench coat that she had bought with her own money and boots that were made for walking, not for posing. "You know, Daddy," she said, taking a sip of her cider, "I ran into Sterling yesterday. The banker who was at the rehearsal dinner." I looked at her sideways. The old protective instinct flared up for a second, but I tamped it down. "Oh," I asked. "And what did Mr. Sterling have to say?" "He asked if we were accepting new investors for the pharmacy." She said, a small, mischievous smile playing on her lips. "He said he heard our second quarter numbers were impressive. He called me a rising star." I laughed. It was a deep belly laugh that startled a flock of pigeons nearby. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that we are a family business," she said, "and that our cap table is full. Then I told him to have a nice day." I looked at her with a swelling sense of pride that felt like it might burst my chest open. She had turned down the same people who had snubbed her a year ago. But she didn't do it with anger. She didn't do it with bitterness. She did it with the cool indifference of someone who doesn't need their validation anymore. We walked a little further, finding a bench near the lake. We sat down watching the ducks navigate the cold water. "I spent 40 years building bridges, Maya," I said quietly, looking out at the water. "I spent 40 years worrying about load-bearing walls and tensile strength. I thought that if I built a big enough fortune, if I bought a big enough house, I could protect you from everything." I turned to look at her. But I was wrong. The house didn't protect you. The money didn't protect you. Those things actually attracted the wolves. Maya took my hand. Her grip was strong. "You protected me, Daddy," she said. "You stepped in when I couldn't see the danger." I shook my head. "I stopped the wedding, yes, but the real protection came later. It came in the last year. It came when I stepped back and let you handle the contractors for the store. It came when I let you fire that supplier who was cheating us. It came when I stopped trying to carry you and started teaching you how to climb." I realized something profound sitting on that bench. For years, I had been obsessed with my estate plan. I had spent hours with Saul Weinstein, drafting trusts and wills, terrified that someone would steal my money after I was gone. But looking at Maya, I realized that my legacy wasn't the brownstone. It wasn't the shares in Apex Materials. It wasn't the bank accounts. My legacy was sitting right next to me. My legacy was her spine. My legacy was her ability to look a liar in the eye and say no. My legacy was the fact that she would never again let a man make her feel small. We sat there for a long time, just breathing in the cold air, enjoying the peace. There was no drama. There were no secrets. Just a father and a daughter in the truth. "Come on," she said, standing up and dusting off her coat. "We have an appointment. Russo will have a heart attack if we are late." We walked out of the park and hailed a cab to the old neighborhood. Russo's custom tailors looked exactly the same as it had on that fateful afternoon a year ago. The same gold lettering on the window. The same bell that jingled when you opened the door. But the feeling inside was completely different. Last year, this shop had been a place of hiding. It had been a place of whispers and fear, where I stood in the dark, trembling with rage. Today, it was bright. It was warm. And it was filled with opera music. Desmond Russo boomed, coming out from behind the counter with his arms wide open. The man of the hour. The legend of Brooklyn. He hugged me tight, smelling of fabric softener and espresso. "And Maya," he said, turning to her, "you look radiant, bellissima. Being a boss suits you." "We are here for the final fitting, Russo," I said. "Don't tell me you need more time. The gala is tonight." "Time," Russo scoffed. For you, Desmond, I make time stop. Come, it is ready. He led us to the back. He pulled a garment bag from the rack. But this wasn't a tuxedo for a wedding. And it wasn't black. It was a deep, rich charcoal gray made of the finest Italian wool. It was a suit for a businessman, a suit for a leader. Tonight, the Chamber of Commerce was presenting me with the Lifetime Achievement Award, not just for my engineering work, but for the community work we had done with the King Center. We had helped over 50 elderly people reclaim their assets from predatory relatives in just 6 months. The penthouse that Gavin Whitaker had coveted so much was now a bustling office full of pro bono lawyers and social workers. Go put it on, Russo said, and don't hide in the fitting room this time, eh? I chuckled. No more hiding, Russo. Never again. I walked into the stall, the same stall where I had heard Gavin plot my demise. I looked at the velvet curtain. It didn't scare me anymore. It was just a curtain. I changed into the suit. It fit like a second skin. Russo was a master. When I stepped out, Maya was waiting by the three-way mirror. She gasped. "You look handsome, Daddy," she said. "You look like a movie star." I stood in front of the mirror. I saw an old man. Yes, my hair was completely white now. The lines on my face were deeper. But I didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. I saw a man who had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and had come out the other side stronger. Russo handed me a bow tie, a silver one. "Allow me," Maya said, taking it from him. She stepped close to me. I could smell her perfume. She reached up and began to tie the knot. Her fingers were deft and sure. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. While she worked, she looked me in the eye. "I am proud of you," she whispered, "not because of the award, but because you fought for us." I looked at her, this woman I had raised, this woman who had saved herself. "I am proud of you too, Maya," I said. "You are the best bridge I ever built." She finished the knot and patted it into place. She stepped back and looked at me critically, then smiled. "Perfect," she said. I looked at my reflection one last time. The camera in the button was gone. I didn't need to record anything anymore. My life was an open book. I turned to my two best friends, my daughter and my tailor. "Ready to go?" I asked. "Ready," Maya said, taking my arm. We walked out of the shop into the twilight. The city lights were coming on, twinkling like diamonds. But they were real diamonds this time. I thought about Gavin and Constance one last time. I wondered if they were thinking of me. But then I pushed the thought away. They belonged to the past. They were ghosts haunting a house I didn't live in anymore. I stepped onto the sidewalk, taking a deep breath of the city air. It tasted like freedom. This ordeal taught me that the most dangerous wolves don't howl at the moon. They smile at your dinner table. I spent my life building wealth to leave a legacy for my daughter. But I realized the greatest inheritance I could give her was not the deed to a house, but the wisdom to recognize her own worth. True love never requires you to shrink yourself, nor does it demand you to silence your elders. Dignity is not negotiable, and sometimes you have to burn down the fantasy to build a reality that can actually stand the test of time. If you enjoyed this story and believe that family is about loyalty and not just blood, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to someone you love to protect yourself? I read every single comment. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep your eyes open and your heart strong.